Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the stiff-collared lavender-scented world of a Victorian gentleman. You're not a factory worker, not a lord, and definitely not one of those scandalous poets. You are respectable, middle to upper class, the sort of man whose shoes shine before the sun rises, whose cravat folds like a treaty, and whose daily rituals are so precise they might as well be dictated by the Queen herself. You won't believe this, but even before your first sip of tea, you've already committed 6 social sins. 1. You slept in past 6. 2. Your shaving water was lukewarm. 3. You used the wrong side of the towel. And 4, 5, 6. We'll get to those. Alright, before you get too cozy, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe. But only if your heart says yes. And let me know in the comments. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? I love seeing the sleepy corners of the world come together. Dim the lights, get that fan going for some background vibes, and let's chill into tonight's little adventure. It starts with a sound. A low knock on your bedroom door, then the swish of polished boots on floorboards as your manservant tiptoes in. He's carrying the shaving basin. Porcelain, cold, and filled with water that's either scalding or frigid. There's never an in-between. You sit up stiffly, trying not to wrinkle the pillow. Because creased bed linen implies restless sleep, and restless sleep implies a guilty conscience. Victorian society doesn't say this out loud, but everything, even your pillow, can be read like a moral document. Now to the basin. You glance at the shaving mirror. It's cloudy. Of course it is. A gentleman's mirror must never reflect too clearly. Vanity is vulgar. You lather your face with soap made from tallow and ash, coarse stuff that stings. A single nick, and your whole day smells like alum and failure. Razor in hand, you perform the morning's first test. Can you slice along your jawline without flinching? The pressure isn't just from the blade, it's from the generations of stern-faced fathers and judgmental aunts who believe a well-shaved chin reflects a well-governed soul. And here comes mistake number 4. You forgot to oil the blade last night. A gentleman never forgets the oil. Not because of the blade, but because forgetfulness suggests emotional disarray. And disarray is dangerous. As you rinse, your valet hands you the towel. Not the bath towel. No, that's for scullery boys. You use the face cloth, monogrammed, stitched by your mother's maid on her wedding day. Or was it the parlour girl? Either way, it's sentimental, and sentimentalism, in small acceptable doses, is allowed before breakfast. You dab, not wipe. Wiping is too aggressive. Dabbing shows restraint, control, gentlemanly virtue. And speaking of restraint, let's talk about what you can't do. You can't stretch. That's something animals do. You can't yawn. Without covering your mouth with a handkerchief embroidered with your initials, God forbid someone sees your molars, you definitely can't scratch anything below the rib cage. If it itches, you suffer. That's what separates you from the masses. You may, however, sigh quietly while seated on the edge of your bed, staring out at the fog. Victorian fog isn't just weather, it's ambience, and it gives your life the illusion of drama, which helps, given you're not allowed to show any real feeling. But let's return to the real enemy, your body. The Victorian gentleman is supposed to be a mind first, a soul second, and a body never. Yet here you are, drowsy, half-shaved, and in desperate need of relief. But let's be clear, the chamber pot must never be mentioned. It exists, yes, and the footman will dispose of it, but the less said, the better. In some households they call it the morning porcelain, in others simply the object. This leads to mistake number 5. You muttered a curse when you stubbed your toe on the bed frame. That's not just impolite, it's uncouth. And being uncouth before 7 a.m, you might as well be a chimney sweep. The 6th mistake is subtle. As you rise, you let out a low groan. Audible signs of aging are not permitted until after your eldest son joins Parliament. As your valet lays out your undergarments, linen drawers, wool stockings, and a starched undershirt that feels like wearing a legal document, you remind yourself, this is only the beginning. You haven't even chosen your waistcoat yet, and already you're tired. But that's the trick, isn't it? Victorian masculinity isn't about comfort. It's about endurance. Silent, starched and polished endurance. The cold creeps through the floorboards as your feet touch down, and you quickly slide into your house slippers. Soft leather, no laces, no frills. You never walk barefoot, not even in solitude. A gentleman's toes must remain as unseen as his opinions on plumbing reform. You stand tall, not because your spine is flexible, but because slouching in a nightshirt is a moral failing. Even at your most vulnerable, you must look like someone who owns a cravat. Now comes the ritual of scent. You open the small cabinet above the wash basin and survey your options. Bay rum, lavender water, or lime cologne. You reach for the lavender, not because you particularly like it, but because it's subtle. Anything stronger might suggest French tendencies. Dabbing a few drops behind your ears, you recall the etiquette manual your uncle gave you at 12. A gentleman's aroma must not precede him. That same uncle died of gout and stubbornness at 53, but his scent advice lingers, like the lavender. Your valet returns with your boots, polished to a blind shine. He offers you a glance of approval, and you nod once. No thanks. No words. Just the silent acknowledgement that both of you understand the performance is about to begin. Downstairs, the household stirs. Somewhere a maid is stoking the drawing room fire. Another is ironing the morning paper. You descend the stairs at exactly the right pace, neither hurried nor sluggish. A measured tread, heel first. No hopping down like an enthusiastic puppy. You're not enthusiastic. You are composed. You enter the morning room. The curtains are already parted just enough to let in filtered light, but not so much that the sun could shine directly on the carpet. Fading fabric is vulgar. Your seat at the breakfast table is unoccupied. Of course it is. It always is. Your father once told you, a gentleman's seat is wherever he quietly insists it is. The toast rack waits, still warm. The eggs, soft-boiled, never fried, are covered in a silver dome. The bacon is crisp but folded discreetly, lest it appear greasy. And the tea? Poured only when you are seated. Nothing is rushed. But before you eat, there's one more custom to fulfill. You unfold the Times, not for reading, heavens no, but for shielding. It's a breakfast partition, an invisible fence of words. It signals that you're present, but not available. The only acceptable interruption is a cough, a real one. Twice is concern, 3 times is dismissal. As you sip, you recall a curious rule. A true gentleman never salts his eggs. Why? Because it implies distrust in the cook. And if your household cook is anything, she's a matriarch with knives and grudges. Behind the veneer of breakfast calm, there's quiet warfare. The maid who refills the milk jug glances too long at the window. She's likely been crying. One of the footmen limps slightly, probably dropped a tray last night. You notice all of this, but say nothing. That's the role. A gentleman observes, interfering is for Americans. Now your wife, or perhaps mother, enters, depending on your station in the story. She greets you with a small nod. Not a kiss, not a smile, just the quiet contract of mutual schedule awareness. She picks at her toast with marmalade, and you respond with a morning's only permitted inquiry. Did you sleep? Note, not how she slept. That's too intimate. Just, did you? The answer is almost always, well enough, which means either don't ask, or we're avoiding something. Breakfast concludes with a soft bell rung by the butler. It's not for you, it's for the kitchen. But you hear it and you feel it. Every bell in the house is a whisper from the social machinery that keeps you propped up in this stiff chair, swallowing lukewarm tea and pretending the jam isn't slightly off. And so, having completed the first great rite of the day, waking, grooming, dressing and breakfasting, you rise. Not too fast. You fold your napkin precisely into quarters. You place it on your plate, not beside it. Beside is for amateurs, and you exit the room without looking back. Because a gentleman always moves forward, with dignity, detachment, and a faint smell of lavender. You return to your chamber to find your valet has begun the second most important ritual of the morning, dressing you like a human layer cake. One shirt, not even close. Before breakfast you wore the underlinen. Now comes the full uniform of respectability, each layer a stitch in the social straitjacket you dare not shrug off. He starts with the drawers, long and loose, made of stiff linen. They itch slightly, but not enough to complain. Then the stockings, wool, striped if you're feeling rakish, plain if you expect company. They're held up by garters that bite into your calves, not because they must, but because form leaves no room for slack. Next comes the undershirt, more linen naturally, stiff at the collar, stiff at the cuffs, stiff in soul. The Victorians weren't known for comfort, they were known for control. You raise your arms as your valet lifts the waistcoat over your head. It smells faintly of mothballs and last Thursday's brandy, but it buttons clean and high, just below the throat. No room for belly. The belly is treason, hence the corset. Yes, that's right. You, a grown man with opinions on gunpowder taxes and the Crimean War, wear a corset. Not for beauty, mind you, though it does nip in the waist just enough to keep your figure dignified. No, this is for posture. Straight back, broad chest, modest curves. That's the silhouette of the moral male. As your valet pulls the laces tight, you don't flinch. You've learned to breathe shallow. Deep breathers are dreamers, and dreamers make poor husbands. With that secured, it's time for the shirt. The actual shirt, not the undershirt. This one has a starched collar so sharp it could slice ham. Your neck already bears the faint red line of yesterday's battle with it. You slide it on like armour, because that's what it is. No one sees your thoughts, but they'll see your cuffs, and they better gleam. Now to the cravat, folded with more precision than the average architectural plan. There are over 30 recognised ways to tie a gentleman's cravat, each with its own implication. The oriental, too foreign. The mathematical, too fussy. The simple knot, a bit pedestrian. You settle on the mail coach, suitably firm but not too showy. Your valet folds, tucks and pins with surgical care. One wrong angle and you'll look like a radical. You check the mirror. You're almost someone, but not quite yet. The waistcoat already on must be buttoned down. Every button except the bottom. That one stays undone. Always. Why? Because King Edward VII once forgot to button his, and rather than admit to a belly too full of pheasant, society changed the rules. Now all gentlemen leave that last button open, a permanent tribute to royal indigestion. Over that goes your morning coat, cut to flatter, tapering at the waist and flaring slightly at the hips. The fabric is dark, black, navy, or charcoal, because colour is dangerous. Too pale, you're a poet. Too bold, a gambler. Brown? Heaven help you. Your valet hands you your watch chain, which loops from pocket to buttonhole with precise length and drape. Too loose, and you look sloppy. Too tight, and you look miserly. Either way, someone will notice. Next, the gloves. Suede. Grey. You don't wear them yet. You carry them. Wearing gloves indoors is a faux pas. But not having gloves, social suicide. You're now at 5 visible layers. Add the corset and linen beneath, and you're 6 layers deep. In summer, in a house with coal fires and no ceiling fan, you're sweating, but gently, respectably, almost invisibly, and you haven't even left the room. Your valet approaches with the final touch, the top hat. Not just any hat, your hat. It has been brushed with care, lined with silk, and stored in a velvet box since last week's opera. You lift it gingerly, never touching the crown, only the brim. Why? Because touching the top leaves unsightly fingerprints, and besides, it suggests nervousness. A gentleman's hat should never betray his inner state. You place it on your head at a precise angle, slightly forward, never tilted. A rakish tilt implies you've been in a brawl, or worse, a musical theatre performance. At this stage in your toilette, appearance is a shield. Every fold, thread, and angle is curated to say, "I belong." You glance once more in the long mirror. You see what society wants you to see. A man of means, discipline, and silent despair. And then comes the unexpected part, sitting down again. You must now lower yourself onto the dressing chair without creasing anything. This is a skill. Sit too quickly and your tails bunch. Too slowly and your cravat pin stabs your neck. You execute the motion like a man folding into a museum display. Your valet begins the ritual known only to servants and ghosts. Brushing. Even if your coat is clean, he brushes it. Why? Because brushing symbolizes order, and order is the currency of your class. The brush itself is boar bristle, kept in a mahogany box. With each stroke, dust is removed not just from fabric, but from your social soul. You remain still, arms slightly lifted, as if being embalmed. Once finished, your valet withdraws silently. No words. If he does speak, it must be about the weather or the horse manure in the street. Nothing closer to the skin. You stand, freshly sculpted, and look again in the mirror. You cannot slouch in this outfit. You cannot breathe freely. You definitely cannot eat anything more substantial than a small apple without risking a button incident. But you are dressed, and that matters more than comfort. And so, with gloves in hand, you descend the stairs once more. The hallway smells faintly of rose polish and anxiety. As you approach the door, the butler awaits. He opens it precisely 4 seconds before you reach the threshold. Never too early, that would look eager, and never too late, that would suggest chaos. Before you step outside, a final check. Hat, gloves, watch chain, handkerchief, left pocket, small notebook, right pocket, no bulges, every fold perfect, every detail invisible to the common eye, but as loud as a drum to those who know. Because this is Victorian England. Your outfit isn't just clothing, it's a declaration of worth. 6 layers of starched morality. One misstep, one wrinkle, and everything crumbles. You're not dressing for comfort, you're dressing for survival. Outside, the fog hangs low. Horses clatter. A boy shouts something obscene in the distance. A gentleman ignores it. You step into the street like you belong in a painting, because that's what's expected. Every minute of your morning has been dictated by rules that no one will thank you for following, but they will notice if you don't. And just as you begin your walk, feet angled just so, chin elevated to the proper moral height, you remember you forgot your walking stick. Well, better to limp through society than look disorganized. You glide into the breakfast room's empty quiet still echoing in your bones. But now it's time for battle. A battle fought not with swords or speeches, but with toast tongs and marmalade. You see, breakfast in your house isn't merely a meal. It's a performance of restraint, choreographed down to the smallest crumb. Everything on the table has a role. Everything you do at that table speaks volumes about your upbringing, your finances, your emotional state, and perhaps even your marriage. You're under scrutiny, not visibly, of course, that would be vulgar, but in every raised eyebrow and every butter knife that pauses halfway to the plate. Your butler lifts the silver dome with silent ceremony. The options? Boiled eggs, just one or two. Toast, always cold. Marmalade, bitter. Sardines, if it's a Wednesday. The mere presence of devilled kidneys? That means guests are expected, or your wife is feeling combative. You reach for the toast rack, not the plate. This matters. The plate would keep the toast warm. Unacceptable. Warm toast implies a hurried kitchen. A proper household makes toast early, lets it cool fully, and presents it upright in a wire frame like edible playing cards. The cold toast rule is not questioned. You do not question the monarchy. You do not question toast. You select your slice with tongs, never fingers, even if you're alone, especially if you're alone. Because in Victorian society, the worst thing you can be is common and touching toast with bare hands. That's practically French. Now butter. The dish is small, porcelain, and shaped like a cow. You dig carefully. Not too deep, not too much. A gentleman never scrapes. You spread the butter in small circles starting from the centre, moving outward like a social ripple. Lumps are barbaric. If your toast tears, you keep a straight face. Emotion is for novels. You sip your tea, Earl Grey or nothing. It has been steeped not for taste but for ritual. You hold the cup with thumb and forefinger only. The pinky? Slightly extended but not too much. Too stiff and you're a caricature. Too relaxed and you're a brewer's son. Then it happens. Your egg wobbles. It's in a silver cup, narrow-bottomed, looking innocent. But one wrong move with a spoon and you'll shatter the shell too loudly. That noise, the dreaded crack, is offensive. Your spoon must tap, not smash. The shell should come off in clean, quiet flakes like falling wallpaper. Inside, the yolk is just slightly runny. The toast fingers, cut diagonally, always diagonally, must dip just once. No swirling, no sucking. That would imply pleasure. Victorian breakfast is not for pleasure. It's for posture. At the far end of the table, someone, your aunt, your wife, perhaps your cousin, says something like, "It looks as though it might rain." This is not a weather report. It is code. It means, don't bring up politics. Or, let's pretend nothing is wrong. Or even, your hat looks absurd. But you respond with a neutral, yes, it does look rather grey, because the game is not to communicate. It is to maintain civilization. And speaking of rules, heaven help you if you attempt to eat something forbidden. Like bananas. Yes, bananas. Once imported from Ceylon and Jamaica, the banana caused a minor social panic in the 1870s. Why? Because no one could agree on how a gentleman was meant to eat one. With a knife and fork, peeled partially by hand, sliced into a dish and covered with cream. Eventually, high society quietly banished bananas from the breakfast table. Too suggestive, too foreign, too unruly. So, you pretend you've never heard of them, like feelings or jazz. You place your teacup back into its saucer with a practiced grace. No clink, no tremble. The saucer itself is bone china, hand-painted, probably by someone in Staffordshire with failing eyesight and 12 children. But none of that matters now. What matters is that your teaspoon lies perfectly parallel to the rim, not angled, not resting inside the cup like some barbarian might do. The conversation, if it can be called that, continues in soft volleys. "Did you see Lady Hewish's hedges?" Translation. "She's letting herself go." "The Ashcrofts are in town." Translation. "Expect an awkward dinner soon." Every sentence at breakfast has two meanings, the words and the silence between them. You must learn to read both. A true gentleman always knows when not to answer. You glance at the newspaper, folded neatly beside your plate. It's not to be read, certainly not cover to cover. That would mark you as either eccentric or a member of Parliament. No, you skim the headlines. You pretend to care about shipping tariffs. You frown at news of unrest in Bengal. You nod solemnly at the phrase tax relief, though you've never done your own accounts. The newspaper isn't information, it's a prop, and like all good theatre, it must be handled with poise. You turn each page carefully, like stroking a cat that might explode. As the clock nears the quarter hour, a subtle panic sets in. You must finish eating before the mantel clock chimes or risk seeming idle. Lingering is for the unemployed and the unwell. You butter one last triangle of toast, paper thin, barely there, and fold your napkin into thirds, not quarters, that was earlier. At the end of breakfast, thirds are correct. Why? Because Queen Victoria once folded hers into thirds after her husband died, and society in its infinite obedience followed suit. A quiet way to grieve, one slice of linen at a time. You stand. The chair legs scrape the floor, gently, apologetically. You do not push it in. That's the footman's task, should he be within reach. He isn't. You pretend not to notice. At the doorway you pause, not for reflection, but to let someone else speak if they dare. They don't. So you proceed into the hallway, footsteps echoing faintly on the tile. Your gloves are in your hand, your hat is waiting on the stand. Outside, a carriage rolls past, wheels hissing in yesterday's rain. You breathe in deeply and taste coal dust and restraint. There's a myth that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. For the Victorian gentleman, it's the most dangerous. Not because of the eggs, not because of the kidneys, but because one slip, one joke too casual, one yawn, one lopsided crevaille, and your entire house of cards might wobble. You've survived it today. Congratulations. But remember, this was only the start. Lunch is still hours away, and already you're exhausted by the need to appear effortless. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you long for toast you can touch, tea you can slurp, and a banana eaten like a man unafraid. But not today. Today, you're the model of calm, buttered propriety. You step out the door into the pale, filtered light of late morning. The fog clings to the cobblestones like a silk veil no one dares lift, and the air carries the mingled perfumes of horse dung, roasting chestnuts, and damp tweed. But this isn't just a walk. Oh no, this is the daily promenade, the unspoken ritual of every self-respecting Victorian gentleman. You're not going anywhere in particular. You're not late for anything. But how you walk, where you walk, and who sees you walking may determine your fate far more than any letter of recommendation. You adjust your gloves, soft suede, undamaged seams, no stains from last week's incident with the leaky ink pot. A gentleman never leaves the house with scuffed gloves. Better to go bare-handed in winter, which of course would also be a scandal. Your hat rests lightly atop your well-oiled hair. You give it a tiny downward nudge, not a dramatic tip, just a subtle correction. Hat etiquette is a language, a slight touch of the brim for a passing lady, a more pronounced gesture for someone of equal rank. No acknowledgement whatsoever for butchers or booksellers, not out of cruelty, mind you, simply protocol. Your walking stick, yes, you did remember it after all, clicks against the pavement in perfect rhythm with your steps. Not too fast, not too slow. Fast walking suggests haste, and haste suggests disorganization. Slow walking suggests illness or self-importance, both undesirable. The ideal Victorian pace? Leisurely yet purposeful, as though you're heading somewhere important, but in no rush to arrive. A passing cabby splashes through a puddle, and you take a deft sidestep without breaking stride. This is crucial. You must never react to your environment. A startled jump, undignified. A curse, scandalous. A damp trouser hem, a small price to pay for appearing imperturbable. You nod at Mr. Pendlebury across the street. Upper class, owns 3 terraced homes, once shook Disraeli's hand. He returns the nod, just barely. His cane is ivory-tipped. Yours is not. These things matter. You pass a shop window and catch your reflection. Tall, upright, composed. You check 3 things: posture, trousers, and hat angle. All are acceptable. You do not pause. Only tradesmen admire their reflections. Now comes the obstacle. Mrs. Litchfield, widow, wears purple, though technically still within mourning. Known for sudden greetings and even more sudden questions. "Good morning, mister. Insert your surname here," she calls. You remove your hat with practised elegance. Not too high, not too low. Just enough to say, "I see you, I acknowledge you, but I am not stopping." She smiles. She wants to chat about rhododendrons or gout remedies, or her nephew's misbehaviour at boarding school, but you offer the perfect escape. "Ah, Mrs. Litchfield, delighted. Unfortunately, I'm on my way to the chemist. Terribly important. The usual, you know." You aren't. But no one questions a gentleman on his way to the chemist. She nods, understanding the code. You replace your hat, resume your walk, and breathe a silent sigh. That was close. Because every moment out here is a test of presence. You're walking not just through the street, but through a minefield of unspoken expectations. You must appear healthy, wealthy, moral, and well-pressed, even if your boots pinch and your corset's digging into your ribs, and above all, you must never loiter. Loitering in the Victorian mind is not simply a waste of time, it's an erosion of identity. Only vagabonds, radicals, and Americans loiter. You, however, promenade, which is entirely different, even if it looks exactly the same. The promenade continues, long, unhurried, but never idle. You pass by the railings of the park, glancing at the gravel paths and iron benches where ladies sit in layered skirts like blossoms in a botanical catalogue. You do not stare. A gentleman notices. He never ogles. One of them lifts a parasol slightly. Is it a signal, a flirtation, a trick of the light? Best to assume nothing and keep your eyes fixed forward. Too much eye contact could be taken as an invitation. Too little as rudeness. You opt for the noble in between, a passing glance dignified and blank. Up ahead, a street boy shouts, "Paper, sir! Scandal in Parliament!" You do not flinch. You certainly do not buy a paper from a child in rags. What would people think, that you need gossip shouted at you like some common clerk? No. Your news arrives at the breakfast table, folded and ironed. A dog barks near your boot. A mangy terrier, likely owned by a draper. It's sniffing at your trousers. You resist the urge to kick it. That would be vulgar. But you cannot stoop to shoe it either. So instead, you glare, not at the dog, but at its owner, until he scurries over with profuse apologies. You offer a half smile, more eyebrow than mouth. Forgiveness, gentleman style. Now the stakes rise. You're approaching the square, the social heart of your district. Ladies with gloves up to their elbows promenade clockwise, parasols spinning like gentle accusations. Gentlemen move counterclockwise, eyes flickering sideways for acquaintances, rivals, or someone to ignore with precision. You spot Mr. Eldridge, the son of a mill owner. He greets you with a flourish of his hat, just a bit too dramatic. New money always forgets that subtlety is currency. You respond with the briefest touch of your brim and the faintest bow of the head. A masterclass in underwhelming acknowledgement. You pass the tailor's shop. In the window, a new cravat style, slightly wider than fashion currently allows. You study it as you walk. Will it catch on? Dare you be early? No. Let someone else look foolish first. At the corner, 2 elderly men sit on a bench, pretending to read papers, but actually rating passing footwear. One leans over and murmurs something about someone's heel wear. The other snorts in agreement. You make sure your souls are invisible. Then, disaster. A gust of wind lifts your coattails, both of them. For one horrifying second, your unbuttoned waistcoat hem flaps in the air. A lady gasps. A man coughs. Somewhere a pigeon flutters with judgment. You recover, of course. Pin the coat back with one hand. Tilt the hat downward. Increase your pace just slightly. Not a run, but the pace of a man late for a luncheon. This moment will be remembered. But how it is remembered depends on your exit. You compose your stride, straighten your spine, and pass the greengrocer without a glance. By the time you round the next corner, the coat-tail scandal has become a mystery. Perhaps even a story of stoic recovery. You've survived the promenade, but make no mistake, every inch of your route was recorded, not by cameras, but by memory, by Mrs. Litchfield's twitching lace curtain, by the boot-watching retirees, by the tailor's apprentice behind the glass. Your shoes may be scuffed tomorrow, your cravat may fall out of fashion by next week, but for now, you walk the tightrope of gentlemanly decorum, and you haven't slipped. Not yet. You return home precisely at midday, not before, not after. Any earlier, and you might appear idle. Any later, and it suggests your errands have spiralled into chaos. A gentleman's timekeeping is like his handwriting. Neat, slightly understated, and judged relentlessly. Your boots come off at the door. Not by your hands, of course. That would be indecorous. A silent bootjack and a valet await in the hallway, ready to receive your damp outerwear with the reverence of a religious rite. You step into your house slippers, still polished of course, and straighten your cravat, which has developed the faintest, almost imperceptible tilt. It's now time for calling hour, that most treacherous period of the Victorian gentleman's day. For the next 2 hours, you may be expected to receive guests or, worse, pay visits yourself. And here lies the danger. The entire system of polite society is governed by a small rectangle of cardstock. The visiting card. You have a stack of them in a silver case, initials embossed, corners perfectly cut. Too thick, and it screams vanity. Too thin, and it looks like it came from a grocer's ledger. Your name, Mr. Reginald P. something or other, sits in modest cursive, free of any ostentatious titles unless you are a baronet, and even then, one must be bashful about it. You receive the calling tray from the butler. Today's offerings: 4 cards, 2 gents, 1 lady, and an unknown monogrammed initial. You inspect each one with surgical precision. The 2 gentlemen. Obligatory returns, likely hoping for dinner invitations or, worse, favours with your solicitor. The lady. An artful reminder that you forgot her Tuesday card, though you did see her at the square, pretending not to recognise your waistcoat. And the monogram? You narrow your eyes. It's Mrs. E.T. Dashwell. Not a name you expected. She hasn't called in 3 months. Last you heard, she had taken the waters in Bath. Her reappearance now suggests gossip or money troubles or both. You flip the card gently, scanning for corner cues. This is the secret language of polite society. A card with the top right corner folded means the person delivered it in person. Top left, condolences. Bottom left, congratulations. Bottom right, farewell. A folded card in an envelope, extremely formal, possibly a dual challenge, or worse, a dinner invitation. Mrs. Dashwell's card has no fold, meaning it was sent by servant, casually. She expects you to respond within 48 hours, or she'll take it as a slight, or a sign you're ill, or worse, financially embarrassed. You turn to your writing desk and withdraw your own tray. Inside, a fresh stack of your cards, your best fountain pen, and the dreaded red ledger, the book of social accounts. Every call, paid or received, must be recorded, every visit returned, every name matched with date, time, intent, and outcome. It's part diary, part minefield. You open the book to today's date and write Dashwell, E.T., card received, no fold, return call by Thursday. Even now you feel the pressure building. Will you go in person? Send your valet? Leave a card with your butler? Each choice says something, whether you like it or not, and you haven't even started your own visits yet, because a gentleman must also call, and God help you if you arrive at the wrong hour. You double-check the time, nearly 12:30. That means you're within the sacred calling window between noon and 3. Too early, and you'll catch your hosts unprepared. Too late, and you risk interrupting their digestives or, worse, their privacy. You slip your silver case of visiting cards into your coat pocket, button up, middle button only of course, and retrieve your hat. Today you'll be making 3 calls. Not visits, calls. Visits involve sitting. Calls are shorter, stiffer, and ideally over in less than 15 minutes. Just enough time to sip sherry, make polite noise about someone's niece, and leave your scent on the furniture. Your first stop is the Ashcroft's house. Newly moneyed, frightfully decorated, but socially important because Mrs. Ashcroft owns a pianoforte and knows how to deploy it strategically during dinner parties. You approach the door, already rehearsing the facial expression. Friendly, but not too familiar. Polished, but not arrogant. Somewhere between, I might fund a library, and I know a man who fences pearls. The door opens, the butler appears. Mr. Ashcroft is not receiving. This is code. Either he's genuinely not in, or he's hiding behind a curtain with a brandy and a toothache. No matter. You nod solemnly, remove your card case, and draw one with the slow grace of a seasoned magician. You flick the card, not slide it, never shove it, onto the silver tray. One fluid motion, then you turn on your heel and leave without a word. That's how it is done. An entire conversation without a syllable exchanged. Your next stop is the Widow Pembroke. Her calling hours are notoriously brief, only between 12:45 and 1:15, and her drawing room is full of ticking clocks, each 5 minutes apart. You arrive just in time. The maid ushers you in with a curtsy and a faint whiff of pickled onions. You nod. No mention of scent. That would be unkind. The drawing room is dim, overstuffed, and smells of dried lavender and old silk. Widow Pembroke is seated in a green wingback, one gloved hand resting on a volume of Milton. She does not rise, but inclines her head slightly. You remove your hat, bow, not deeply, and are offered a chair not directly across from her but slightly off-centre. This is her way of reminding you she once danced with a duke. You chat about the weather, her cats, the sudden decline in quality of post. You both agree something must be done, though neither of you suggests anything. She offers you a biscuit. You decline. The correct biscuit, dry, round, unsalted, exists solely to be refused. Accepting it would suggest appetite. Appetite suggests desire. Desire suggests a lack of self-control. At 13 minutes and 20 seconds you rise. Any longer, and she might begin to suspect affection or ambition. You thank her, briefly, with no flourishes, and depart. Another successful social performance, executed with all the warmth of a handwritten banknote. Your final stop, the Everleys. You hate the Everleys. They are loud, nouveau riche, and their hall smells of overripe oranges. But they have a billiards table and 4 daughters, which makes them unavoidable. You arrive, leave your card, decline to enter. You've done enough today. Back home, your butler receives your coat and gloves. You exhale. Finally, you made all your calls. You remembered everyone's card etiquette. You recorded everything in the ledger. And for what? To be seen, to be whispered about, to remain in the loop but never truly inside it. In the Victorian world, silence has a shape. It's the size of a calling card, folded once in the corner, and it speaks volumes. It's nearly 3 o'clock when you finally collapse, figuratively, into the gentleman's sanctuary, the drawing room, or if you're lucky, the smoking room. A space free from corseted chit-chat, lace-trimmed doilies, and the delicate warfare of social visits. But don't relax just yet, because now begins the most treacherous performance of all. Conversation. Not debate, not discussion, not heartfelt exchange. But that uniquely Victorian form of polite nothingness, where men speak endlessly without revealing a single truth. You take your place in the armchair that's unofficially yours. How do you know? Because no one else ever sits there, and when they do, everyone pretends not to notice while judging them internally. You cross your legs, not too high, never ankle on knee. That's practically American. Just the right angle to suggest comfort without abandon. Mr. Talbot sits across from you, swirling a brandy as if it's a divining glass. You know Talbot. You've known him since Eton. He once fainted at the sight of a squirrel, but now styles himself a rugged imperialist. Beside him, Colonel Brimsby clears his throat. A man who has fought in at least 3 wars and yet cannot tolerate lukewarm soup. Quite the fog today, Talbot murmurs. You nod. Yes, lingering. Brimsby adds, they say it's the coal soot mixing with sea mist. This is bold, scientific, a risky move. You respond carefully. Possibly, though I heard the barometer was misread in Devon. That's safer, vague, agreeable. This is what passes for lively exchange. No feelings, no politics, unless it's a jab at foreign diplomacy. No talk of money, certainly no mention of health, digestion, or marital disappointment. These are the unspoken laws of male civility. Remember, you're permitted 5 safe subjects. 1, the weather, always acceptable. 2, the quality of port, never too enthusiastic. 3, the failings of public transport. 4, horseflesh, real or metaphorical. 5, the unreliability of junior staff. You do not, under any circumstances, talk about your inner world. No musings, no poetry, no sadness, unless expressed as disdain for continental fashion. This isn't repression, it's discipline. At least that's what the books say. You try steering the conversation toward cricket, but Talbot counters with a sudden remark about opera. Opera is dangerous territory. Too many vowels, too much emotion. It's music that implies yearning, and yearning has no place in a waistcoat. So you pivot, subtly. I find the acoustics at Her Majesty's Theatre rather improved. Now you're safe again, talking about buildings. Stone has no feelings. Brimsby nods. Better than that infernal echo chamber they built near Holborn. The sound dribbles like weak broth. You sip your brandy. Smooth. Faintly smoky. The kind meant to be appreciated, not enjoyed. For a moment silence settles. A heavy, shared pause. No one rushes to fill it. Silence, in this context, isn't awkward. It's masculine. You're not meant to speak constantly. You're meant to radiate unspoken authority while staring into the fire. Someone stirs a sugar cube into tea. The tiny clink echoes like a bell tower. Shocking news from the colonies, Talbot says finally. You all nod again. Not because you know the news, but because the word shocking is the perfect cue to look wise. Indeed, you reply, and let the silence close again, like a glove over the heart you're never supposed to show. The fire crackles softly, its glow reflected in the brass fender. You lean slightly back, never slouch, and allow your eyes to rest, but not close. Closed eyes suggest vulnerability, and though you're among friends, you must still remain a figure of control. Someone speaks. Did you hear about Jenkins? Ah, Jenkins. He's not in the room, which means he's fair game. Sent his son to study Greek, the voice continues. A murmur of disapproval ripples around the chairs. Not because Greek is scandalous, but because it suggests idealism. Idealism leads to thinking. Thinking leads to writing. Writing leads to trouble. You chime in. I always thought Latin was sufficient for a gentleman. Greek is for theologians. It's the perfect remark. Innocuous, snobbish, and safely dismissive. Mr. Crawley, the retired magistrate with a face like a sharpened shoe, nods. Saw Jenkins at the club last Thursday. Ordered lemonade. Lemonade? A soft gasp. Someone exhales through the nose. You shake your head slowly. Poor taste in beverages often precedes political liberalism. You've won the room, for now. This is how men communicate here. Not through ideas, but implications. Everything must be coded, and the code is passed down from father to son, uncle to nephew, tutor to trembling schoolboy. Once, long ago, you asked your uncle why no one ever spoke plainly in these rooms. He blinked slowly and replied, because men who speak plainly usually end up on pamphlets. Since then, you've learned the rhythm. Accuse without accusing, agree without committing, and change topics before anyone feels anything. The conversation shifts seamlessly to hunting. You haven't been in years. Your aim is dreadful. Once you shot your own coat. But you nod along as someone recounts a pheasant incident so elaborate it may involve time travel. No one questions him. The story isn't meant to be believed. It's meant to affirm identity. Just then, the door creaks. A servant enters with a tray, a decanter, 3 glasses, and a plate of nuts. Unsalted. Because salt encourages thirst, and thirst leads to speech. You take a glass. Brandy again. Just enough to warm the throat, not enough to loosen it. Talbot says something about the theatre again, and you let it drift by. You're watching the fire, listening to the grandfather clock tick behind you. Every sound feels measured. Even your own heartbeat seems slower in this room. And then someone says something almost real. My brother, Grimsby begins slowly. He's had a touch of melancholia. A silence deeper than the rest. You sense everyone tense just slightly. You consider your response carefully. Ah, you say. The season's been particularly damp. It's perfect. You've acknowledged the statement, offered a cause, and redirected blame toward the weather, all without actually touching the subject. Grimsby nods, relieved. This is your training at work. Because a Victorian gentleman must be fluent in emotional sidestepping, not out of cruelty, but survival. Sincerity is dangerous. It opens doors you might not be able to close. So instead, you offer each other well-wrapped gifts of meaninglessness, and thank each other for the packaging. Later, as you rise, brushing invisible lint from your sleeve, Talbot claps you on the shoulder. Good talk. You both know nothing was said. But in this world, silence is the sincerest form of respect. You retreat from the drawing room with the delicate poise of a man stepping away from a conversational grenade that thankfully didn't explode. The door clicks shut behind you, muffling the fire's pop and the soft coughs of men growing older in silence. But your next destination is no less sacred, the smoking room. Not every house has one, but yours does. Tucked at the rear, panelled in dark oak, dimly lit by gaslight, and smelling like the inside of a tobacco merchant's waistcoat. This is the one room in the entire house where a gentleman may remove his mask slightly. Not fully, but just enough to smirk at a joke, or raise an eyebrow when someone says something mildly improper. You open the door and breathe in the thick atmosphere. Smoke coils lazily in the air like gossip without vowels. The room is quiet. A low murmur of voices, the occasional snap of a match, the hiss of a drawn puff. This is not a place for laughter. This is where truth is hinted at, never spoken. You settle into a cracked leather chair that's been there since before the Boer War, inherited like a bad habit. A servant approaches with a humidor. You glance at its contents: Maduro, Corojo, Sumatra. You select a mild Havana, not because you prefer it, but because the more robust blends stain the fingertips, and stained fingers suggest labour. He cuts it with a silver guillotine, the motion clean and practised. A lit match is offered, and you draw slowly, letting the smoke settle in your mouth before exhaling just enough to signal civility. A gentleman never blows smoke like a train. That's for circus performers and anarchists. Mr. Etiquette sits across from you, already 2 inches into his cigar, and precisely 4 sherries into the afternoon. He's the kind of man who's never raised his voice, yet once convinced an entire county council to ban outdoor picnics on Sundays. He leans forward. "Have you heard about Calthorpe?" "Of course you haven't, but you nod." Only whispers. This is the key to smoking room conversation. Pretend you know everything, say very little. Etiquette raises an eyebrow. Apparently he's gone in for bicycles. Another pause. Bicycles. In this room, that word carries the weight of revolution. Bicycles mean freedom, movement, unchaperoned women, dangerous knees, and worst of all, sweating. "I suppose it was bound to happen," you say carefully. He always did lean toward the modern. You take another draw, gaze drifting to the smoke ring forming overhead. Somewhere nearby, a man swirls whiskey and mutters something about trousers becoming narrower. In the smoking room, the world is passed into 3 categories. 1. Acceptable eccentricities, collecting snuff boxes, wearing monogrammed socks. 2. Unacceptable curiosities, frequent visits to the British Museum. 3. Moral collapse, vegetarianism, watercolours, handshakes with servants. Calthorpe, it seems, is teetering dangerously toward Category 2. Someone coughs. Not a sick cough. A conversational cough. An invitation. Lord Fenwick speaks up. "Of course, when my father first saw a velocipede, he declared it the devil's rocking chair." Everyone chuckles softly. You join in, not because the joke is funny, but because it's an echo of power. Fenwick's father once owned half of Surrey. The cigar warms your fingertips, not unpleasantly. A gentle burn, a reminder that you are allowed to enjoy this, within reason. But even here, where the masks are thinner and the light is low, the rules remain. Your posture must stay upright, ash must not fall, and above all your smoke must never betray your thoughts. The air grows thicker, more contemplative. The smell of tobacco mingles with the faint scent of polished walnut and old arguments. You lean back just slightly, enough to imply relaxation, but never slouching. Slouching, even here, suggests defeat. Across from you, Mr. Tolliver fiddles with his cigar band, peeling it slowly, meticulously, as if unravelling a secret. Everyone knows Tolliver has debts. Everyone pretends not to. That's the smoking room contract. Acknowledge nothing. Notice everything. He finally speaks. There's word the Reform Club might begin admitting men from industry. No one responds immediately. Industry, a word that tastes like soot, that evokes hands without gloves, men who work in offices with inkwells and ledgers, men who produce things other than conversation. Lord Fenwick finally says, "They'll be wanting clerks in the House of Lords next." A few chuckles. Yours is quiet, safe. But your eyes flicker. You know the world is changing, creaking at the joints like an old house. But here, in this room, such things are only acknowledged through sarcasm or metaphor. Etiquette stubs out his cigar in the ashtray, bone china painted with faded roses. He does it with the elegance of a man squashing a rumour. "You can always spot the new types," he says. "Too much starch in the collar, always asking questions." Everyone nods. A gentleman never asks questions. He insinuates. If he must know something, he lets others offer it freely, or else not at all. The servant reappears to collect empty glasses. He doesn't speak. He doesn't make eye contact. He knows this space isn't his. You offer a slight nod, just enough to acknowledge his efficiency, not his existence. He disappears like a well-trained ghost. Another voice, deeper, from the corner. Mr. Bexley, quiet until now. My son, he says, writes articles. Everyone freezes. That word, articles, hangs in the smoke like a challenge. On science, Bexley adds after a beat. You feel it then, the invisible shifting of weight. Science is dangerous territory, too close to facts, too close to ideas that might upset the natural order. Ah, you say, the natural sciences, I presume, not those philosophical ones. Bexley's mouth quirks. He's studying weather. That's acceptable. Weather is, well, British, harmless, inconclusive. You rescue him with a gentle pivot. We'll always need men who can explain fog. Lord knows the rest of us have suffered it in silence. Laughter, low, grateful. Bexley nods, his moment of near vulnerability safely redirected into a joke. That's what this room is for. A place where you can hint at things without saying them. A place where secrets are not confessed, but allowed to smoke themselves out quietly. The cigars dwindle. Someone yawns, not too widely, and checks his pocket watch. The hour is nearing 4. Time to prepare for the ordeal of dinner. The servants will be setting the table now, aligning forks like soldiers, ironing napkins with enough starch to cut glass. You rise, stub your cigar with a final thoughtful twist, and adjust your waistcoat. The others follow. No one says goodbye. You merely exit in order of social rank, as dictated by everything no one ever explained, but everyone always knows. Outside the room, the air feels thinner, cleaner but colder. You've said very little, but you've done something very important. You've spoken in the language of smoke, silence, and suggestion. And in this world, that means you still belong. As the late afternoon light filters through the heavy curtains, you make your way down the polished corridor, your steps hushed, deliberate, toward the most treacherous institution in a gentleman's daily orbit, the club. Not the kind with dancing, certainly not the kind with music. This is the gentleman's club, that solemn temple of silence, walnut panelling, and liveried staff who know more secrets than any priest. You're not here to be entertained. You're here to exist, publicly, in a space where nothing must go wrong. Your carriage deposits you on the stone steps of the Athenaeum, or perhaps the Reform Club, or Boodle's. It hardly matters. They all function by the same ancient unwritten laws. The doorman opens the entrance with a nod. He doesn't smile. Smiling suggests recognition, and recognition suggests intimacy. That would be a disaster. Inside, the smell of dust, port, and polished ambition. Oil paintings of long-dead vice-chairmen stare down at you with the bored disappointment of men who once managed 7 estates and now have nothing to do but haunt stairwells. You enter the lobby and pause at the front table. Here lies the armchair map, a small leather-bound book where members may sign their name to reserve a particular chair. Not all clubs allow this, but those that do enforce it like canon law. Woe betide the man who takes another member's armchair. You recall the incident in 73. A doctor, new money, sat in Lord Bessington's usual chair. The resulting silence lasted 2 months and indirectly led to 3 resignations. You scan the book. Your chair, third left by the fireplace, is unclaimed. You ink your name in quiet relief. Inside the reading room, the decor hasn't changed since Wellington's time. High ceilings, dark carpets, chairs that creak ominously if one so much as thinks impure thoughts. A roaring fireplace guarded by a screen that may or may not have once belonged to Byron. You take your place, open a copy of the Times, and pretend to read it. You're not here for news, you're here for visibility. Other men enter. Hats are removed, never hung. No one speaks. Coughs are allowed. Twice per hour, per man. Throat clearing is frowned upon. Sneezing? Grounds for expulsion. You once saw a man escorted out for humming under his breath. A servant passes. You raise a finger, just one. He returns moments later with a crystal tumbler of brandy and a small silver dish of salted almonds. You eat one, just one. Then you rest the spoon delicately atop the dish. This signals restraint. At the far end, old Major Greaves is napping, upright, eyes closed, yet somehow still judging everyone. Beside him, Mr. Hammond of the Colonial Office turns a page with a movement so slow you wonder if he's reading or simply calibrating his breathing to Victorian standard. Suddenly, a disturbance. Mr. Peebles has arrived. You hear him before you see him. His boots squeak, and he mutters a faint apology to no one in particular. He's new. Recently inherited a tin fortune. Doesn't quite grasp that in this room even apologies are considered too forward. He heads for the fireplace, your chair, but pauses when he sees the name book, now closed. He hesitates. Then, praise be, he veers left and drops into a lesser chair near the staircase. Crisis averted. Because here, chairs are everything. Each one has a legacy, a smell, a quiet shape pressed into it by decades of identical trousers. Sit in the wrong chair, and you're not just physically out of place, you're spiritually exiled. You glance down at your newspaper again. An article on tariffs. You don't understand it. You don't need to. What matters is that you're holding the Times, seated in your armchair with your legs crossed at the socially correct angle, and everyone sees you doing it. You've now been seated for 47 minutes. You've read precisely 3 lines of text, memorized the scent of your tumbler, and watched the flame in the fireplace shift ever so slightly to the left. Time behaves differently here. It congeals like aspic, thick and faintly ridiculous. The club isn't a place to do anything. It's a place to be perceived doing nothing expertly. To the untrained eye, this is a room of idle men. But to a Victorian gentleman, it's a hall of unspoken negotiations. Who's sitting where? Whose paper is folded crisply? Who sips their port with dignity? And who gulps like a tradesman at a tavern? Across the room, Mr. Renshaw lowers his monocle and makes a grave mistake. He begins to speak, audibly. "I say, have any of you seen the new steam tram?" Every head turns, not toward him, but away from him. Exclusion by gaze redirection, the deadliest of all club punishments. Renshaw wilts slightly. Aware of his error, he retreats into his cravat like a tortoise returning to its linen shell. Conversation, when permitted at all, is confined to the stranger's room, a separate chamber filled with chairs designed specifically to wobble. You have never set foot in it. No one with self-respect has. Back in your chair, you reach for the small brass bell at your side. One gentle tap. Not a ring. Rings are for emergencies. A single tap is for a discreet refill. The brandy arrives moments later, just enough to wet the rim of your glass and reaffirm your station in the liquor hierarchy. In the corner, Sir Altham is completing his daily ritual. Removing a single snuff tin from his pocket, opening it silently, inhaling with the force of a sleeping ox, and then closing it in 3 deliberate clicks. No one reacts. He's been doing this since 1846. It's become part of the building. You look up at the large clock on the wall. 5 o'clock draws near. Soon it will be time to vacate your armchair. The dinner hour approaches, and club etiquette demands that no one occupy a public seat during the transition. from pre-dinner drink to full social theatre. It's an invisible shift, but everyone feels it. You rise, slowly, carefully, leaving a faint indent in the leather that says, "A gentleman sat here. He neither slouched nor spoke, nor erred." Your footsteps echo softly down the hallway as you pass the library, a room you've entered precisely twice and never on purpose. Books are to be owned, not opened. A gentleman's knowledge must be implied, never displayed. As you near the cloakroom, you overhear a whispered comment between two members. "Did you notice Peebles?" Boots squeaked again, a sigh. Unfortunate. These are the verbal footnotes of your society, tiny damning details traded like currency. No one here forgets a misstep, especially not one involving improper footwear. You collect your gloves, your hat, and your expression of indifferent superiority. A final glance over your shoulder confirms it. Your chair remains empty, untouched. Its warmth yours alone, now fading into the fabric. Because in the club, nothing is truly yours, except what you protect through habit, ritual, and unspoken rules. As you step back into the street, the world feels louder, more chaotic. But inside your coat, your calling card case presses faintly against your chest. You have been seen. You have not been spoken ill of. You have survived the armchair wars. Back home, twilight creeps in like an uninvited aunt. Soft, persistent, smelling faintly of rain and roses. You're escorted into the drawing room by your butler, who informs you, in the fewest syllables possible, that the mail has arrived. There it is. A small stack of envelopes placed with care upon the silver salver near the decanter. A gentleman's post, unlike his opinions, must always be sorted before dinner. That way, anything explosive can be ignored, and anything dull can be delegated. You pick through the stack. A note from your tailor, routine. A catalogue of umbrellas, presumptuous. A hand-addressed letter on thick cream paper, interesting. And finally, resting like a cat who knows its power, a folded corner envelope marked with a wax seal. You don't need to open it to know what it is. A courtship letter, but not a love letter. No, no. Victorian courtship is an exercise in indirect warfare. Love may be the battlefield, but paper is the weapon. You open it delicately. No tearing, no haste. A man who rushes at letters surely rushes at emotions, and those are best handled with tweezers. Inside, a carefully measured note from Miss H. Farnsworth, written by her but likely approved by her mother. It references an upcoming garden luncheon, a recent charity auction, and, curiously, a shared interest in Mesoamerican artifacts. You raise an eyebrow. You've never spoken about Mesoamerican artifacts in your life, but that's not the point. The point is, this is an opening move. The kind of letter a young woman sends to a man of her station who might, in time, be convinced to pay a formal visit to her family's greenhouse under the guise of admiring begonias. You must respond. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but within 5 days. Anything sooner seems overeager, anything later disrespectful. Your reply must strike the perfect tone. Interested, but occupied. Available, but mysterious. You rise, retrieve your writing set, a heavy brass box containing your monogram stationery, a fresh nib, and a glass inkwell the colour of bruised plums. Now, the performance begins. Dear Miss Farnsworth, not dearest. That's for widows and sisters. Thank you for your charming note. Charming, safe, non-committal, like a golden retriever in a waistcoat. Regarding the luncheon on the 17th, I shall endeavour to attend, schedule permitting. Schedule permitting does 2 things. Implies you are busy, even if you're not, and keeps you from being trapped under a pergola discussing gardenias with a woman who may or may not believe in phrenology. You finish with, your obedient servant, not too warm, not too cold. Then the most important part, folding the letter. Once vertically, then horizontally, with the text facing inward. Seal with wax. Emboss your initials. The seal must be centered. A crooked seal suggests you are drunk, or worse, French. You place the letter in the outgoing tray. The butler will send it by morning. You've played your part. And that's what courtship is, isn't it? A polite fencing match where the blades are letters, the parries are glances, and the fatal thrust is asking about someone's favourite composer too early. You haven't lost. You haven't won. You've written just enough to stay in the game. You step away from the writing desk with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has neither revealed too much nor committed to anything that might someday involve flowers, poetry, or feelings. In other words, a perfect Victorian correspondence. Now you prepare for what may be the most psychologically demanding portion of the courtship ritual, the potential in-person encounter. To meet a lady properly, meaning not in the street, not in a shop, and certainly not without a chaperone, you must first navigate the etiquette of the visit. And if you do choose to attend Miss Farnsworth's luncheon, the path ahead is a tightrope strung between a teacup and social annihilation. First rule, never arrive early. Early suggests desperation. It implies you have no engagements, that your entire day revolves around gazing at violets and listening to someone's aunt misquote Tennyson. Second rule, never arrive late. Late means you're disrespectful, or worse, continental. You must arrive precisely 13 minutes after the hour, not 10, not 15, 13. That is the secret number of all successful courtships. Enough to seem fashionably delayed, but not enough to cause alarm. Upon arrival, your cravat must be crisp, your cuffs free of ink stains, and your shoes polished to a point where they reflect some, but not all, of your surroundings. Shiny enough to impress, dull enough not to look like a mirror salesman. A light bouquet? Acceptable, but only if chosen by your manservant and wrapped in neutral paper. Too much colour implies passion, too little, poverty. You settle for white lilac and dusty miller, bland, non-committal, and ever so slightly poetic. When you're introduced to the lady herself, you bow, not deeply, and make exactly one polite comment about the weather and one observation about the shrubbery. Then you fall silent. If she speaks, you listen. Not too attentively, that's forward, but not distractedly either. You nod, once per sentence, twice if she mentions something charitable, like sick children or orphans who paint. Do not under any circumstances compliment her appearance. Compliments must be triangulated. That is, you may admire her handwriting, or her taste in upholstery, perhaps even her interest in ancient artifacts, should she insist on raising the subject again. But say nothing about her eyes, her figure, or her dress. That would place you on the fast track to ruin, or worse, marriage. The ultimate goal is to suggest interest without demonstrating it. Let her wonder. Let her fret. Let her consult her aunt, her diary and her parrot, before deciding whether you are the sort of man who writes poetry in secret or merely prefers gentleman's tailoring. And you? You leave the luncheon having eaten one cucumber sandwich, said 17 words, and tilted your head just enough during conversation to appear curiously unreadable. At home, you log the entire event in your social diary. May 17th, garden call. Miss H.F., moderately agreeable, discussed Aztec pottery. Hostess served ginger cordial. Tolerable. You seal the book. Done. You have done everything expected and revealed absolutely nothing. Which, of course, is the first law of Victorian romance. Never show your hand until you've memorized hers. You stand before your bedroom mirror again, bathed in the forgiving glow of gaslight, and prepare for the most delicate, most expressive, most fraught ritual of any Victorian gentleman's evening toilette, the grooming of the moustache. Not the beard. Beards are for philosophers, German professors, or uncles in exile. Not the clean shave. Shaving twice a day implies vanity, or worse, perspiration. No, the moustache is the middle ground. The compromise between chaos and control. You examine it closely. It has survived your promenade, your club chair, and even Mrs. Farnsworth's subtle glances, but now it looks fatigued, one side rising slightly higher than the other, like an eyebrow with aspirations. You sit. A small wooden box is brought forth, lined in velvet, containing your grooming tools, combs of horn and bone, scissors sharpened like scalpels, wax imported from Hungary, and a narrow cloth for dabbing excess pride. First, the combing. You part your moustache gently, pulling out wood from the philtrum. You once read that Napoleon took 2 full minutes to comb his before battle. You, a peaceful man, take 3. No reason to rush greatness. The comb catches, just slightly, on the right side. A tiny knot. You wince. Not from pain, but from the implication. Knots suggest neglect. Neglect suggests distraction. And distraction, well, leads to opera tickets, overdue debts, and feelings. You reach for the scissors. Snip. A single hair floats down like a falling aristocrat. Graceful, useless, and no longer welcome. You don't breathe while trimming. One twitch, and you risk imbalance. And moustache imbalance is social imbalance. Now the wax. You warm a pea-sized amount between thumb and forefinger. Too much, and you look like an aspiring magician. Too little, and your moustache wilts like overboiled asparagus. With gentle strokes you shape it. Not curled, that's theatrical. Not flat, that's military. You choose the English dignitary style, lifted slightly at the corners, as if your upper lip is always considering a subtle joke. As you groom, you remember what your grandfather once told you. A man may fall in love, fall into debt, or fall from favour, but his moustache must never fall. He said this just before tripping over a dog and landing in the pond, but the wisdom still stands. Now comes the test. Symmetry. You lean forward, examining the curve of each side. Perfect moustache symmetry is rare, like an honest banker or a subtle hat. But you strive. You always strive. Because a man's facial hair isn't just decoration, it's language. A handlebar moustache. Arrogant. A pencil moustache. Possibly French. No moustache? A terrifying sign that you might trust your emotions. Yours? Yours says, I read parliamentary minutes and keep my feelings in alphabetical order. A soft knock at the door. Your valet. Dinner in 30 minutes, sir. You nod. You do not speak. Words might disturb the alignment. You reach for the final touch. The moustache guard. Yes. A small metal device curved like a smile, designed to shield your artfully groomed whiskers while you sip soup. You secure it in its velvet pouch for later. Never display it before the first course. That would be uncouth. The moustache guard must appear casually, as if you barely remember it exists, though you once had one monogrammed in silver by a man who also engraved dueling pistols. You stand. Moustache. Neat. Balanced. Smelling faintly of wax, rosewater, and victory. There's a certain glow in the gaslight now, a gleam to your eye, a rise to your brow. You're not smiling, not exactly, but your moustache is. Downstairs, dinner preparations are underway, and you descend like a man aware that his moustache has just reached its finest hour. You do not smile at the footman, you do not nod, but your moustache does the talking, curled just enough to suggest you've read a scandalous novel, but chose to burn it. You enter the drawing room, where the other gentlemen are gathered, waiting, digesting, observing. Sir Talbot has arrived early and committed the gravest sin imaginable. He has not touched up his facial hair. It sags slightly at the corners, One side brushes the lip. It's not dramatic, but here, in the world of silent wars and napkin diplomacy, it is catastrophic. You take your seat beside the fireplace and cross one leg over the other. Knee over knee, not ankle over thigh, which is what one might see in an artist's garret or a Parisian cafe. Then you retrieve your moustache guard from your inner coat pocket, allow it to catch the firelight for a second longer than necessary, and set it carefully on your knee. Talbot sees it. You know he does. He straightens slightly, subtly adjusting the edges of his own neglected curls. Too late, old boy. You've already won. But moustache grooming isn't just about vanity. In Victorian England, it is a moral act. There are pamphlets, real ones, arguing that facial hair promotes virility, courage, and rational thought. Some even suggest that the British Empire's military success is due in part to the facial superiority of its officers. Of course, they never say beard. No, beards are wild, foreign, medieval. The moustache is modern. The moustache is controlled. The moustache is empire, dinner is called. You enter the dining room where candles flicker like conspiracies. Everyone finds their place without being told. It's an instinct, like birds flying in formation, or dukes avoiding eye contact with baronets. At the table, soup is served. Clear broth, light, with precisely nothing that might cling to the lip, but still, you come prepared. With no ceremony at all, you slip the moustache guard onto your spoon. It's a slim crescent of polished silver, curved to fit just beneath your nose. It shields the sacred whiskers from liquid. You eat neatly, smoothly, with quiet superiority. The man to your left sees it and makes a mental note to purchase one. The man to your right already has one but forgot it, and now avoids the soup entirely. Talbot tries to mimic your angle, leaning over his bowl and sipping with exaggerated caution. His moustache droops immediately. One damp curl begins to wilt visibly before your eyes. You do not gloat, you do not smirk, your moustache does it for you. After soup comes meat, something roasted, probably glazed. A gentleman's moustache should not interfere with the consumption of meat. This is where poor form is revealed. Grease on the tips, a tragedy. Meat caught in the corners, a scandal. You navigate the knife and fork like a fencer, clean, elegant, no flourishes. Throughout the meal, the moustache remains steady. It is a statement of self-control. Conversation flows around you. Gossip, politics, a mild debate over port vintages. But you remain composed, your eyes calm, your brow lightly raised. Because the truth is, a gentleman may falter in speech, or in debt, or in chess. But if his moustache holds, he is still a man of substance. And when the final plate is cleared and dessert arrives, something soft, perhaps syllabub or sponge, you gently wipe the edges of your moustache with your personal handkerchief, embroidered, of course. Fold it once and place it back in your coat pocket. No crumbs, no streaks, no shame. You rise from the table untouched, a pillar of dignity. And as the gentlemen file into the adjoining room for coffee, you leave a small trail behind you. Not of scent, or sound, or scandal, but of confidence. The kind that only wax and willpower can produce. You enter the dining room again, this time as a guest, greeted by the subtle symphony of glassware, silver, and expectation. The dinner party has begun, and while the food may be nourishing, the true feast tonight is of etiquette, where every bite, every gesture, every raised eyebrow is part of a silent duel. A footman pulls out your chair. You do not thank him. Thanking servants is like complimenting the wallpaper, unnecessary and vaguely suspicious. You nod instead, a slow, subtle motion suggesting mutual understanding. He disappears without a sound. The napkin lies before you, linen, monogrammed, faintly starched. You unfold it with the grace of a priest handling relics. No snapping, no flapping, no shaking it like laundry. A gentle open, folded once across your lap, not bib style. Bibs are for children, or the French. Your fellow diners settle in. To your left, an aging colonel with sideburns you could brush horses with. To your right, Lady Prunella, something or other, known for owning exactly 7 lapdogs and 1 magnificent eyebrow. The soup arrives. Again. And once more, the spoon becomes a stage. You remember the golden rule. Always move away from yourself. Spoon outward, not inward. Bringing the spoon toward your mouth suggests hunger, and hunger suggests weakness. You must chase your soup like a man who doesn't need it. You sip, not slurp, not blow. Certainly not let it sit. Temperature is not a concern. The soup may blister your tongue, but better that than the shame of hesitation. Lady Prunella sips with perfect timing. You match her. Your spoons rise and fall like oars in a synchronized regatta of self-restraint. Next comes the fish. It arrives with a special fork, slender, curved, unnecessary. You must use it. You must also know which side to start from, the left, and which bones to ignore, the small ones. A gentleman never removes bones from his mouth. Instead, you use the fork to push them discreetly to the side of the plate. This, done incorrectly, resembles minor surgery. Done correctly, it looks like poetry performed on porcelain. Conversation begins in low tones. Someone mentions the continent. Someone else sighs at the mention of Italian opera. A third person recounts a harrowing encounter with a mislabeled wine bottle. All perfectly acceptable topics. But you offer the crown jewel of polite banter, a story about a dinner gone wrong. I once attended a supper where the host served goose, without mustard sauce. Gasps. Laughter. A woman drops her fork. You smile modestly, eyes lowered. You're winning. Then comes the entree. Beef, likely, or mutton, with vegetables arranged for aesthetics, not sustenance. You eat slowly. Fork in left hand, knife in right, tines down, no switching. Only Americans switch, and only barbarians stab. Someone asks about your views on the Eastern question. You tilt your head. Complicated, much like dining without a proper oyster fork. The table chuckles. The Colonel nods. Lady Prunella regards you with renewed respect. You've said nothing, and yet you've said everything. And as the footman clears your plate, silently, invisibly, you know. You've passed the soup, the fish, and the beef without a single error. But dessert is coming, and dessert is where men are ruined. The moment the dessert spoon is placed before you, you feel it, that collective tightening of posture around the table. Dinner may be conversational theatre, but dessert is the curtain call, and many a gentleman has tripped on the custard. You glance at the options. There's syllabub, trifle, perhaps a floating island if the cook is feeling pretentious, and then, worst of all, steamed pudding, a dense, glistening thing that jiggles like gilt. You're served trifle, good, manageable. It comes layered, sponge, custard, jam, cream. Your job is not to enjoy it. Your job is to navigate it with a fork and spoon. The only moment in a gentleman's life where 2 utensils are permitted in the same hand span. You use the spoon to lift, the fork to steady, not stab, never stab. The cream must not collapse, the jam must not run, the sponge must not squeak. This is less like eating and more like sculpting with chilled dessert. Lady Prunella receives a slice of pudding and eyes it like a nun judging a sin. You watch as she slices off a neat corner, then dabs the side with her napkin. Not because it's messy, but because that is what one does. She turns to you and says quite clearly, "I've never believed in raisins." You nod, as if she's confessed a long-held political conviction. Quite right. They're always trying to appear more important than they are. It lands. She smiles. The Colonel chuckles. Someone coughs with approval. The dessert phase is about light absurdity. No philosophy, no commerce, and absolutely no digestion complaints. Even if the syllabub turns sour or the custard is spiced like gunpowder, you will finish it with a serene face and the dignity of a man chewing a contract. Next comes the coffee. It arrives on a silver tray served in tiny cups that force you to hold them like a violinist with a fragile career. Sugar tongs are passed around, and you take 1 cube. 2 is indulgent. None is austere. 1 is correct. No milk. Milk is for children and invalids. You stir without clinking. The silence is sacred now. A few murmurs, a polite chuckle, but the pace slows. People prepare to retreat, to the drawing room or the study, or, in the case of the more excitable gentleman, the billiards table. You excuse yourself with a slow push of the chair, hands by your sides not resting on the table. Touching linen after dessert suggests either drunkenness or Presbyterian leanings. As you rise, you leave your napkin on the chair, not the table. Why? Because placing it on the table implies that you think the meal is over for everyone. A faux pas of the highest order. You pass the butler on your way out. He gives a small bow, 1 inch lower than usual. This means your conduct was observed and approved. You return the gesture with a flicker of the eye and a slight firming of the moustache. Back in the hallway, you take a breath. You have done it. You have survived a Victorian dinner. You have wielded cutlery with restraint, dodged political landmines, responded to pudding with wit, and not once did you mention your own appetite. Because here, in this gilded world of silver spoons and conversational fencing, eating is not a pleasure, it is a test. And tonight, you passed. The hour grows late, and though your stomach is full of trifle and tension, you must now face the next quiet ordeal, maintaining the illusion that your body does not exist. Because the golden rule for any Victorian gentleman after dinner is simple: never sweat, never smell, never admit to having bodily functions of any kind. You retreat to your bedchamber under the guise of changing for evening reading, or perhaps writing a short, soulless note to a distant cousin. But what you're really doing is preparing for an elaborate ballet of bodily concealment. Your valet is already drawing the bath. You don't call it that, of course. The proper term is taking water, as if you're a wilting fern instead of a man who's been sitting in wool for 12 hours. The tub is small, tin, shallow, and makes a sound like a dying kettle when touched. The water, lukewarm at best. Hot baths are still viewed with suspicion in many households. There are physicians, actual published physicians, who claim that hot water encourages madness, fainting, and moral decline. So the water is tepid, and your modesty preserved with a large towel draped across the rim. You step in with caution, not for safety, but for dignity. A gentleman never splashes. He lowers himself as though entering a grave, slow, reverent, shivering slightly but saying nothing. The soap is carbolic, red, harsh, and smells like disinfected celery. You lather discreetly. No grunting, no scrubbing sounds. This is not a washing. It is a symbolic cleansing, performed not to clean the body, but to affirm you are above it. You remember what Lord Mattingly once told you during a winter retreat in Bath. The Frenchman bathes for pleasure, the American for health, but the Englishman bathes to demonstrate that he can afford not to. You take that to heart. This is not an indulgence. It's a ritual of restraint. Your valet waits outside the door, listening for the soft clink of the tin pitcher, which signals you're ready for the rinse. You pour it slowly over your shoulders, letting it run down your back like gilt on a bishop's robe. You dry briskly, quietly, never with a flourish. Then comes the body powder. Yes, because a gentleman never glistens, a gentleman radiates composure, and in the summer months, when your layers feel like you're being embraced by a damp sheep, body powder is your only defence. You dust your chest, your collarbone, behind the ears. Not too much. A cloud of powder is theatrical, but just enough to give you that faint floral dryness, like a library in bloom. Next, the linen refresh. Fresh drawers, fresh undershirt, all starched to within an inch of reason. The old garments are folded and carried away, never spoken of again, like scandalous cousins sent to India. You sit at the mirror. Your skin looks pale, stretched tight over cheekbones, tired of performing stoicism. But your hair is still in place. Your collarbone powdered, your scent faintly lavender with a hint of chalk. You've hidden every trace of exertion, because in Victorian England the ideal man is frictionless. He does not creak, he does not drip. He passes through society like a well-oiled machine in tailored wool, and now you're ready for your final act of bodily defiance. A full evening in company without sweating a drop. Evening has fully descended, and the drawing room awaits, not just the room, but the company, the performance. You descend the stairs once more, pristine and odourless, trailing not a scent but a suggestion that you're a man untouched by biology. You enter with perfect timing, neither first nor last. Too early implies eagerness. Too late suggests you are doing something unspeakable, like perspiring or applying a second layer of hair tonic. Inside, the air is scented with beeswax polish and faintly stale lemon drops. The other gentlemen are gathered near the hearth. Their faces shine ever so slightly. Not with sweat, of course, but the faint glow of surviving dinner. And the ladies, seated at the far end, fanning themselves gently. They're also bound by unspoken rules. They must not shine, but they must shimmer. You, however, must do neither. You must appear glacially composed, even as the temperature rises and your collar tightens like a debt collector's handshake. A gentleman nearby dabs at his brow with a handkerchief. A risk. He earns a sideways glance from Lady Huntington, who fans slightly faster. You take the opportunity to produce your handkerchief, not for dabbing, but for a casual flick at your cuff. A purely fabric-level adjustment. The room is meant to see that you carry a handkerchief, not that you need it. You take a seat near the chess table, neutral ground, a safe spot. To your left, a decanter of port. To your right, a vase of wilting hydrangeas, their petals curling like forgotten apologies. The talk turns to the weather again, and as someone offers the remark, unseasonably warm for September, you allow yourself a single controlled exhale. This is your moment. Warm? Yes, you say, but not insufferable, if one dresses with restraint. A murmur of agreement. You've threaded the needle, commented on the heat without admitting to feeling it. That's an art form. You rise slowly. Not because you're tired, but to circulate. A host must hover. You pass a group discussing a recent charity ball. The phrase, "too much cologne," is whispered. You smile inwardly, knowing that your own fragrance, lavender with the faintest ghost of tobacco, has been calibrated to disappear on arrival. In the hallway beyond the drawing room you spot a mirror. You glance, just briefly, still composed, still powdered, still utterly unhuman in your perfection, and you remember the truth. Bodily discipline isn't about hygiene, it's about hierarchy. To appear clean, composed, odourless, this is how the gentleman separates himself from the labourer, the merchant, the actor, even the clergyman. Your skin is as unreadable as your correspondence. Your hands are clean, not because you wash them, but because they have never needed to work. Even your scent, faint, controlled, non-sexual, is political. You return to the room just in time for tea. Someone drops a teaspoon. It clinks on the saucer like a scandal. Eyes shift. brows raise. And you? You reach calmly for your cup, steady as a marble statue, and sip. The tea is hot, scalding even, but your face doesn't flinch. Your posture doesn't wilt. You swallow with the quiet grace of a man completely disconnected from his nerve endings. You are perfect, and that truly is the most exhausting thing a gentleman can be. It's nearly 10 o'clock and the house has softened. The fire crackles low, teacups clink less frequently. The bustle has died down, leaving behind the faint scent of bergamot, wool, and weary dignity. But for the Victorian gentleman, even silence is a performance, and as the evening slips toward night, you must now engage in the quietest, most constrained social ritual of all, interacting with your servants, without ever actually acknowledging them. Because in your world, there is a rule more sacred than good posture, more crucial than the soup spoon's direction. The line between servant and gentleman must remain invisible, yet absolute. You rise from your armchair and stroll into the hallway, where the gas lamps flicker faintly as if nervous. You hear footsteps ahead, soft, quick, and apologetic. A maid, young, likely new. She sees you and immediately looks down, folding into the wall like a shadow with a mop. You do not speak to her. You do not thank her. You do not even nod. Instead, you look slightly past her. Not through her. That would be cruel. But past her, as if she were a piece of architecture too humble to notice. Because speech creates familiarity, and familiarity in this house is social death. You continue walking. Somewhere, a door creaks. A footman appears in the corner of your eye, then vanishes like a well-trained ghost. Your boots click against the tile floor, not loudly, but enough to remind the house that you are awake, aware, and watching. You ascend the stairs slowly. Each step is an opportunity to display calm authority, and behind you, nearly silent, follows your valet, Mr. Simmons, carrying your nightwear and a basin of fresh water. You don't look at him, but you know he's there. When you reach your chamber, he opens the door for you, then sets the basin down on the marble-topped washstand. Not a word is exchanged. He lays out your robe, he fluffs the pillow, he removes your cufflinks with a gentleness normally reserved for baptismal fonts, and all of this is done without direct eye contact. The unspoken rule is clear. Your valet is your mirror. He must reflect you, anticipate you, but never distract you with the burden of his own humanity. But sometimes, the mirror fogs. Tonight, for instance, as he folds your trousers, you notice a tremble in his wrist. Barely there, but once seen, it cannot be unseen. You're not meant to notice this. You're not meant to care. But still, a tremble. Was it cold? Fatigue? Sorrow? You consider asking. Just once. Just quietly. But then you remember your training. A gentleman does not pry. A gentleman does not burden his staff with concern, because concern implies emotion, and emotion implies equality. Instead, you offer the greatest kindness you can muster. You say flatly, "That will be all, Simmons." He pauses, slightly longer than usual, then bows, just enough to show gratitude, not enough to seem familiar, and leaves. The door clicks shut. You are alone now, alone with the warm water, the flannel robe, and the strange, persistent echo of a man's hand trembling over your folded waistcoat. You sigh, barely audible. The room exhales with you. Because even when no one is watching, a gentleman must never speak too loudly, not even to himself. The fire in your chamber gutters softly, casting long shadows across the wainscoting and wardrobe. You stand at the wash basin, sleeves rolled precisely halfway up your forearms, no higher. Bare arms are for prize fighters and physicians, not gentlemen. You begin your evening ablutions, a splash of water to the face, Cool, controlled, not a drenching, not a gasp, just enough to remove the day without revealing the man beneath. Your robe is waiting, navy, thickly woven, monogrammed on the left breast. A gift from your aunt, chosen not for comfort but symbolism. She once wrote that a man's nightrobe should speak of order, not indulgence. You think about that often as you tighten the sash in 3 careful loops. You move to your writing desk, not to write anything of consequence, but to perform the act of being a man who writes. You open your journal, uncapped fountain pen poised, and write a single line. Servants moved quietly today. You pause, underline quietly once. That's enough. Then, as always, you blot the ink, close the cover, and lock the journal away. Your private thoughts are so carefully censored, you'd scarcely recognize them in the light. Now comes the final choreography of the evening, getting into bed without disturbing the air too much. You extinguish the wall lamps one by one. Not all at once, that's theatrical. The proper way is gradual dimming, until only the fire remains, flickering gently like a memory too impolite to speak aloud. You pull back the covers and examine the pillow, crisp, centred, folded at the edge. A small square of lavender-scented linen lies atop it, a cooling cloth, changed daily, never acknowledged. You remove it, set it aside, slide into bed, not collapse, not flop. You lower yourself as if being observed, because in this house, in this world, you always are, even when alone. Your head sinks into the pillow, not deeply, just enough. You lie flat, arms at your sides, legs straight, the proper posture of a man who is at rest, but never relaxed. And then, at last, you hear it, the whisper of footsteps outside your door, a servant doing final rounds, checking windows, drawing curtains, confirming that the master of the house is safely abed. You close your eyes, though you're not yet tired. In this silence you consider the day, the walk, the moustache, the pudding, the girl, the tremor in Simmons's hand, all of it compressed into the soft whir of gaslight cooling in the pipe. You breathe in through your nose, lavender, coal dust and ink, and you let it go. But before sleep arrives, there's one last rule you remember, the most sacred one. A gentleman must never dream audibly, because if anyone were to hear your thoughts, your longings, your fears, your weariness, they might realise something awful, that beneath the starch and the silence, you are still a man. And that, in Victorian England, is the most impolite truth of all. Morning returns as it always does, quietly, grimly, without asking permission. You rise slowly, aware that your back protests slightly more than it did the year before, but you ignore it. A gentleman may acknowledge duty, debt, or diplomatic failure, but never discomfort. The house is awake, but only just. Somewhere downstairs, a maid is scrubbing brass with vinegar and crushed eggshells. Somewhere else, a footman is re-ironing a curtain tassel because the first attempt lacked conviction. You dress, you descend, you re-enter the day, and immediately the gauntlet of minor decorum begins again. You step into the vestibule and there it is, the umbrella stand. You hesitate. The skies are grey, the streets are damp. Your boots, shined last night, will suffer, and yet, to carry an umbrella before it rains, that suggests you anticipate the weather, and anticipation, in excess, suggests anxiety. And anxiety is what happens to clerks and poets, not men with monogrammed walking sticks. You leave the umbrella, first test passed, next comes the hat dilemma. You have 5 suitable options: the bowler, businesslike; the top hat, formal; the Homburg, continental; the straw boater, informal; and the dreaded soft cap, for cricket and only cricket. It's a Tuesday. You choose the bowler, functional, unimpeachable, silent. Then, gloves, white for balls, Grey for morning, tan for walking, black for funerals. You select brown leather, soft, aged, with just enough wear to suggest long-standing respectability, but not so much as to invite pity. By the time you've left the house, you've already navigated 6 invisible rules and you haven't even spoken to anyone yet. You walk. The streets are busier today. Coal carts, carriages, a man selling eels from a barrow, 2 schoolboys fighting with their satchels. You dodge all of it, politely, without looking directly at anything. But then, disaster. A stranger, well-dressed, possibly respectable, approaches from the opposite direction. You've never met him, but your eyes meet for one fraction of a second too long. He lifts his hat, and now you are trapped. The unspoken code requires that you return the gesture, but how much? A full lift? A 2-fingered brim touch? A slight incline of the head? If you underdo it, you risk insult. If you overdo it, you invite conversation. You choose the modest brim touch and keep walking. But the interaction haunts you for the next 10 minutes. Who was he? Did you know him from the club? Was he related to the Calthorpes? Will he report your lack of enthusiasm to Lady Farnsworth, who will then assume you're cold and unfeeling, which may in turn affect your position on the guest list for Thursday's bridge supper? All of this, from a hat lift. This is what it means to live under the tyranny of decorum. Every gesture is loaded, every nod must be measured, every interaction is a puzzle, and no one tells you the rules. Even standing still is a performance. If you pause too long by a shop window, someone might think you're actually interested in what's being sold. If you stop at a street corner, someone might assume you're waiting. But gentlemen do not wait. They linger. You reach the park. It is blessedly empty, save for a gardener pruning something that once aspired to be a hedge. You take a seat on a bench, cross your legs, not too tightly, loosen your gloves, slightly, breathe. And there it is again, the exhausting art of appearing effortless. You sit alone on the park bench, the cool of the wrought iron seeping into your spine through 3 layers of wool and pride. A pigeon eyes you suspiciously from the edge of the path. Even the birds here seem aware that a gentleman must never look idle, so you perform. Not overtly, of course, that would be vulgar, but you tilt your head at just the right angle to appear lost in thought. Not worried, not sad, just deeply, vaguely reflective, perhaps pondering trade routes, or Dante, or whether the cuff of your trouser is falling a fraction too close to the top of your boot. Across the green, a nursemaid pushes a pram. You do not look. Children in public are to be ignored unless they bow, in which case a faint nod may be granted. Never smile. A smile toward a child suggests warmth, dangerous territory. You check your pocket watch, not because you need the time, but because you need a reason to look down. 11:15. Still an hour before you must return home and pretend to read the fortnightly review. You rise from the bench, slowly. There's an art to this as well. Standing too quickly suggests discomfort or eagerness, or that your leg fell asleep. Too slowly, and you risk looking feeble. Now comes the most dangerous stretch of the walk home, the gauntlet of small decisions. Do you nod at the constable? Yes, but with reserve. Do you cross the street to avoid the group of schoolboys playing cricket with a boot and half a broomstick? No. A gentleman walks through disruptions, unaffected. Do you acknowledge the grocer who bowed at you 2 weeks ago? No, not until he does it again. A gentleman never initiates downward acknowledgement. It's bad for society. As you near your house, you pass Mr. Gadsworth, one of those men who seems always to be outside, always to be polishing something, and always to be waiting for conversation. You brace yourself. "Morning, sir," he calls brightly. You tip your hat. Not a smile, just the hat. That sun's come out after all, hasn't it? It has. But you say, only briefly, I suspect, and keep walking. The phrase is neutral, weather appropriate, and ends the interaction without offence. You've dodged the conversation without being remembered for it. Inside the house, your butler awaits with a discreet nod and an envelope. Delivered by hand, sir. A calling card. Folded top right corner, left by Miss Farnsworth. You nod, silently, but inwardly you shudder, because now you must return the gesture and find a new way to balance appearing interested without becoming entangled in lace, parlour games, or poetry readings. You move to the drawing room and retrieve your red ledger, your book of social accounts, the true Bible of the Victorian gentleman. You log the card, the corner, the time, and the manner of delivery. A return call is required within 3 days. Not 2, too eager. Not 4, scandalous. And then you remember, her garden is often filled with bees. You're allergic to bees. This cannot be mentioned, of course. You must instead develop a prior engagement at the last minute, perhaps with a tooth specialist. That excuse always garners sympathy and never raises suspicion. You close the ledger, sit back in your chair, and exhale through your nose. The gloves come off, the hat is placed carefully on its stand, and you stretch, just slightly, fingers behind your back. You have made it through another walk, another conversation, another coded missive, and all without cracking your facade. But goodness, what a tiring thing it is, this business of being unreadable. The drawing room clock ticks with maddening precision. Each second lands like a mild accusation. You sit beneath a painting of a river no one can name, pretending to read the Gentleman's Gazette, though your eyes haven't moved past the word cravat in 12 minutes. You're waiting, not for someone to arrive, but for nothing to happen. Because at this time of day, just after luncheon, just before tea, a gentleman's chief duty is to maintain appearances without incident. This is the witching hour of respectability. No invitations arrive, no errands may be run, and if you speak too loudly or sigh too deeply, someone may suspect you have time to spare. That would be ruinous. So you engage in the one task every Victorian gentleman must master to survive his station, financial fakery. You rise from your chair and approach the escritoire, polished, walnut, locked twice. You unlock the drawer and retrieve the small black leather folio. Inside are papers, neatly folded, faintly yellowed and terrifying. Statements. Not bank statements. You haven't looked at one of those in years. These are bills. Tailors, cobblers, glove makers, stationers, hair tonics subscriptions, and the enigmatic invoice from Barclay's exotic embrocations, which you dare not question. You spread them out across the desk like a man laying cards before a séance. Debts. Everywhere. Not crushing. Not yet. But stacked like gentlemen at a buffet, leaning forward, full of expectation. You select the tailor's bill, 3 suits, paid on credit, due last month. You cannot pay it. Not now. To pay too soon would draw attention to your liquidity. And in polite society, liquidity is suspicious. If you have money, why are you not investing it in something? A railway, a niece's dowry, a giraffe for the botanical gardens? So you perform a different ritual. You pull out your fountain pen, your finest cream paper, and begin. Dear Mr. L. Merriman, I write regarding your most recent invoice. You never use the word bill. Too aggressive. I find myself, temporarily, engaged in an estate-related matter requiring brief postponement of settlement. You don't lie. You imply. That is your birthright. You sign it not with your full name, but your initials, followed by esque, that small, ridiculous flourish that says, yes, I owe you money, but kindly remember I'm better than you. You fold the letter in thirds, seal it with wax, and drop it into the box marked Correspondence, awaiting excuses. 1 down, 11 to go. Next is the bootmaker. You haven't paid him since spring, but he's clever. He's taken to writing his bills on bright yellow paper. You suspect he wants the servants to notice. You can't have that. You tear the yellow bill in half, not to destroy it, but to reduce its visibility. You will respond later, perhaps with an invitation to a mutual friend's shooting party. That buys at least a month. This is the great dance of Victorian finance, appearing wealthy while quietly ducking creditors. You must look rich enough to be owed something, but never so rich that people expect repayment. You glance at your watch. Time to dress for tea. Another set of gloves, a slightly less formal coat, and the right expression. A smile that says comfortably solvent, even if your waistcoat contains only a button and a borrowed pencil stub. Because in this world, being a gentleman is not about having money. It's about looking like the kind of man to whom money will eventually somehow find its way back. You slip on your second best coat, charcoal wool, subtly worn at the cuffs, and examine yourself in the tall mirror with a critical eye. The fabric sits well. The lapels curve as they should. The wear is almost invisible. Almost. But you tell yourself what every Victorian gentleman whispers silently into the looking-glass. Confidence is credit. And with that, you descend the stairs to join the household for tea. The drawing-room is bathed in late afternoon light, filtered through lace curtains stiff enough to stand upright without a wall. A fire crackles. The tea tray has already arrived. China cups, tarnished tongs, a silver pot too small for anyone's satisfaction, and of course slices of sponge cake that taste like repentance. You take your place. You do not pour the tea. That is for the hostess, or a designated spinster aunt, or whichever daughter hasn't yet collapsed into embroidery-induced despair. Lady Prunella, visiting again, somehow always here, leans over with a smile like a veil pinned too tightly. Do you take sugar? You do? 2 lumps, you say 1.5. Why? Because 2 is indulgent, 1 is severe, but 1.5 suggests balance, economy of taste, moral restraint with a hint of softness, a man who understands both ledgers and lilies. She nods, approving. The cake is offered. You accept the smallest slice. Declining it outright would be noticed. Accepting a large piece would be commented on. But the smallest piece shows you're agreeable, restrained, and, perhaps most importantly, not hungry. A true gentleman is never hungry, not because he is full, but because appetite, like emotion, must be domesticated. Conversation begins with murmurs, always a safe opening volley. Someone mentions a cousin's engagement. Another sighs at the decline in umbrella quality. A gentleman across the room suggests that the Queen is being led astray by certain Scottish influences. A scandalous statement, made acceptable only by his moustache's perfect symmetry. You listen, you nod. You place your teacup back in its saucer without a clink. And then, without warning, it happens. The worst of all possible tea-table catastrophes. Mr. Paddington mentions money. Not vaguely, not abstractly, but plainly. I'm afraid I've had to take on a second clerk, he says, since the railway investment proved less than sound. The air stills. Even the tea seems to stop steeping. You do not blink. You take a gentle sip. You smile as if he said something about begonias, but inside your heart stutters like a carriage on gravel. Why? Because Paddington has broken the illusion. He has admitted reality. He has spoken aloud the thing that must only ever be implied. You must repair it. I find, you say lightly, that investment is a matter of patience, not volume. Lady Prunella hums. Another guest nods. You've done it. You've recast his failure as philosophy. The moment passes. Mr. Paddington shifts uncomfortably. You make a note to never invite him to anything that involves forks, felt hats, or trust. The tea continues. You smile. You sip. You dab your lips with a napkin that has never been used for anything less noble. Inside, however, you think about your tailor's bill and the yellow paper. You do not panic. You simply remind yourself, a true gentleman can be bankrupt in every sense, except presentation. You return to your study just as the sun begins its slow retreat behind the chimney pots, casting long golden bars across the carpet. It's the hour when the world softens, when city noises fade and men settle into their chairs, brandy in hand, and pretend they are at peace. But you? You're preparing for one of the most demanding social tightropes of all. Male friendship. Not camaraderie, not brotherhood, certainly not anything as vulgar as closeness. No, Victorian male friendship is built on shared silences, mutual restraint, and occasional remarks about rowing or trousers. You've invited a friend this evening, Mr. Langley. You've known him for years. You attended the same school, spent the same miserable summer at the same dull estate. He once lent you a copy of Cicero with a pressed violet inside. You never spoke of it. Langley arrives precisely 7 minutes after the hour, correct timing. His hat is in his hand, gloves folded into his left palm. No umbrella. Good. That implies trust in the weather and in you. You do not greet him warmly. Langley, good to see you. You shake hands, briefly, dryly, at a 45-degree angle. No clasping, no back pats. Your palms barely graze. Perfect. You gesture toward the study. He follows without comment. He knows the rules. Inside, the fire is burning. The decanter is full. 2 armchairs await at an angle, never directly opposite. That would be too confrontational. They face slightly away from one another, allowing for a conversation that may occur adjacent to eye contact, but never directly in it. You pour the brandy, 2 fingers each. You do not ask. Asking suggests curiosity. You simply know what he prefers, and he knows not to thank you. There is a moment of silence, a long one. You do not rush to fill it. That would suggest eagerness, and eagerness is dangerously close to emotion. Instead, you sip. You let the room breathe. At last, Langley speaks. Parliament's a mess. Too many speeches, not enough silence. You nod. Silence is underrated. There, a full exchange. 3 sentences, each perfectly opaque. You've set the tone. Langley shifts slightly. His boot scuffs the rug. This is the signal. He's about to say something real, but wrapped in layers of wool and metaphor. He says, I suppose one does wonder sometimes about trajectory. Trajectory. You know what he means. He means, what are we doing? Why do our days feel like museum exhibits? Is anyone truly content with this endless parade of waistcoats and teacups? But he doesn't say that. He says trajectory. And you nod. You respond, the trick I find is to avoid looking directly at it, like an eclipse. Langley chuckles once. Quiet, dry. You've acknowledged the void, gently, casually, without falling in. This is what friendship looks like. Not confessions, not declarations, but shared metaphors and reflected understanding. You rise to refill his glass. He doesn't stop you, and in that moment it's understood. He trusts you, not with secrets, not with grief, but with his presence, his company, his sigh that lasted just half a second too long. And you will not ask what's wrong. You will not press. You will do what men like you have always done. You'll sit and sip and say nothing and be everything. The silence continues, but it's no longer empty. It's seasoned now, like a well-aged port or the corners of your favourite leather chair. Langley reclines slightly. You mimic him, not out of imitation, but out of mutual choreography. This is the language of unspoken harmony, a subtle mirroring that says, we're on the same page, though we'll never admit there is a page at all. From the hallway, the grandfather clock chimes 7 times. It cuts through the quiet like a church bell at a duel. Langley adjusts his cufflink. Do you ever wonder, he says carefully, whether any of it matters? Ah, he's drifting again toward the dangerous cliff edge of reflection. Most men would flinch, but not you. Because you know, the real rule of Victorian gentlemanly friendship is that you must occasionally peer into the abyss together, but never jump. So you offer him the rope. You reply, only when I forget the rules. Langley nods slowly. He gets it. You're not dismissing him. You're saying, yes, I wonder too. But the rules keep us standing. The performance gives us shape. He takes another sip of brandy, then studies the fire. The problem with fires, he says eventually, is that they always look like they know more than you do. You allow yourself the faintest smile. They do. They've seen men try to be themselves. That gets a real laugh. Short but sincere. A gentleman's reward. Then Langley says something bold, unforgivable in lesser circles. I miss her. No name, no context. But the weight of it lands like a cannonball wrapped in linen. You do not ask who, you do not offer comfort. Instead you say gently, some women leave silence behind them. Others leave noise. You're lucky if it's the first. Langley closes his eyes for just a moment. That is enough. You've acknowledged his ache without disturbing it, and in return, he will never bring it up again. He finishes his drink, places the glass on the table with precise care. Not because it's fragile, but because this moment is. You rise. He rises. There is no handshake this time. That would undo the evening. Instead, he nods once. You nod back. Until next week. Unless the world ends. If it does, I'll bring the good bottle. He leaves. And for a long time, you do not sit. You remain standing in the quiet room, the smell of firewood and citrus wax lingering in the air. The shadows have deepened. The house feels older now, more like a theatre after the final curtain. You return to your chair, and you breathe. You think of Langley's confession, of the courage it takes to speak plainly in a world stitched together by euphemism. You think of how fragile it all is, this dance of restraint, this kingdom of sighs and nods. And then you do what any Victorian gentleman would do after such an encounter. You open your red ledger and record, Mr. Langley, Thursday visit, 2 drinks, no lapse in decorum, and in the margin, small and crooked, you write, fire knows everything. Morning again. But not just any morning. Sunday morning. The sacred day. The polished day. The day when all the sins of the week are smothered under starch, hymnals, and the faint smell of beeswax and sanctimony. You stand in front of your mirror, arms raised stiffly as the valet pulls your collar into place like a guillotine's embrace. The Sunday collar is higher, stiffer, sharper than anything you've worn since Tuesday's cravat-related near decapitation. But this is what the Lord requires, or rather, what society requires in the Lord's name. Your shirt is white, immaculate. It must be. A single blemish, a soup spot, a shaving nick would be visible across the pews and echo through the week like gossip in a cloister. You lower your arms, the waistcoat follows, then the long coat, the gloves, grey, the hat, black, the walking stick, not because you limp, but because on Sunday every gentleman must carry an object with no purpose except to signal he has arrived. Downstairs the maid has already brushed your boots, the cook has already burned the toast. The house smells of guilt and marmalade. You do not eat, not on Sundays. Eating shows pleasure, and pleasure dilutes piety. You step out into the pale morning air. London is quieter, not silent, carriages still clatter, and street vendors still mutter, but somehow muted, as though the city itself is trying not to swear. At the end of the block a bell tolls. You walk slowly, never briskly. Brisk walking implies eagerness, and eagerness, especially for salvation, is distasteful. Your church, St. Basil's on Hanover, is stone-faced and soot-kissed, its doors always slightly ajar, as if the Lord himself were too polite to say no. Inside, the air smells of damp velvet and judgment. You take your seat, row 3, right aisle. Not too far forward to seem self-important, not too far back to seem lazy. The organ groans, a boy coughs. You bow your head, not to pray, but to avoid eye contact with Lady Barstow, who is known to whisper prayers loud enough to be heard by God and Parliament. The sermon begins. It is about restraint. It is always about restraint. You know the script before the vicar opens his mouth. He speaks of duty, of discipline, of the dangers of indulgence. He warns against vanity, gambling, female novels, and sugary cordials consumed after dusk. You listen politely. You nod at the appropriate rhetorical pauses. You hum the hymns without moving your mouth. Because church isn't about belief. It's about performance. It's the weekly theatre of virtue, and every gentleman must act as if he is not acting. As the vicar winds down, you glance around. All the men are doing the same thing, sitting perfectly still, legs crossed precisely, hats on laps, hands folded. You spot one unfortunate soul nodding off. He will be publicly snubbed at next Thursday's reading society. The final hymn is sung, the final blessing delivered. You rise with everyone else, not too quickly, not too slowly. You file out into the courtyard. It is time now for the stroll. You walk slowly down the gravel path, surrounded by other gentlemen and their wives, all floating in clouds of cologne and tension. No one talks of the sermon. That would be earnest. Instead, they murmur about azaleas and chimney inspections. A small boy drops his prayer book. No one reacts. He picks it up. His father flicks his ear with a glove. Order is restored. This is Sunday, a day of stillness, ritual, and quiet competition, and it has only just begun. After the church stroll comes the Sunday visits, a series of stops not unlike a military campaign, only with more crumpets and fewer visible injuries. You adjust your hat, straighten your gloves, and prepare your face for the day's second performance. First, the Chadwicks. Their drawing room always smells of lavender and old coins. Mrs. Chadwick greets you with a smile that somehow manages to criticise your cravat without saying a word. Mr. Chadwick is already half asleep in his chair, pretending to read a sermon pamphlet while sneakily watching the canary in its cage. You speak of the weather, the vicar's hat, the scandalous softness of modern hymnals. You stay exactly 12 minutes. Any more implies loneliness, any less rudeness. Then it's off to the Fairchilds. Their daughter, Miss Eloise, offers you tea with trembling fingers. You accept with a nod so minimal it might register only to trained birds. You do not compliment her dress. That would be improper, but you also do not fail to notice it. That would be insulting. Instead you say, "Seafoam is a bold choice this late in the season." She blushes. Her mother beams. You have said everything and nothing at once. Perfect. The conversation turns to appropriate Sabbath activities. Someone mentions chess. Someone else mutters about embroidery. You offer gently, "I find Sundays are best reserved for reflection and starch." Laughter, real laughter, the kind that says, "He's clever, but safe." You've won the visit. You depart. Back on the street, your boots crunch gravel as you return home. The sun has risen higher. The smells of roasting beef drift through the air like patriotic incense. But you do not partake, not yet, not until the clock chimes 2. Instead, You enter your study, remove your gloves, and open your Sunday book. Every gentleman has one. Not scripture, though it may look like it. Not fiction, unless it's morally upright or depressingly slow. Your Sunday book is a volume that makes you seem intellectual without inviting questions. For you, it's the collected speeches of a Lord Shaftesbury, spine unbroken, pages gilt, margins perfect. You read 3 pages, or rather, you stare at 3 pages and think about roast potatoes. When the clock strikes 2, you rise. The dining room awaits. Sunday roast is a solemn affair, no jokes, no stories. Just roast beef, potatoes, boiled carrots, overcooked peas, and a pudding so dense it might legally qualify as building material. You chew slowly, napkin on lap, fork in left hand, knife in right. No slurping, no sighing, no salt. Conversation, if it occurs, is limited to things that have already happened, preferably at least 3 days ago. After the meal, you retreat once more to the study. This is when true Sunday leisure begins. You recline. You unfold the newspaper, careful not to crinkle. You let your eyes drift over headlines. Empire expands. Tea prices stable. One man jailed for laughter in church. And then, just for a moment, you allow yourself the greatest of all gentlemanly Sabbath indulgences. You remove your shoes. Yes, barely. Quietly. Just the left one. You wiggle your toes inside the sock, sigh silently, and feel almost human. But only for a moment, because even on Sunday, even in private, a Victorian gentleman must never appear too comfortable. It is Wednesday evening now, and you are preparing for the one event in the week more dangerous than politics, more delicate than mourning attire, and more mentally exhausting than croquet with in-laws. The gentleman's club. Not the sort of club with dancing or indiscretions. No, this is the sacred domain of high ceilings, lower voices, and cigar smoke so dense you could carve your initials in it. A proper Victorian gentleman's club is a fortress of masculinity filtered through mahogany and social dread. You dress with caution. Not too fine. This is not a theatre. But not too plain. This is not your dentist. Your waistcoat must whisper money, not shout it. Your tie must imply you know how to tie it yourself, even though you never would. And your shoes, they must shine just enough to reflect candlelight, but not enough to reflect your own self-doubt. You arrive at exactly 8 o'clock. Early is needy, late is criminal. The doorman greets you with a subtle nod. Not your name. Never your name. That would be vulgar. You nod back, almost imperceptibly, as if to say, yes, I am expected, and no, I will not do anything interesting. Inside, the hush wraps around you like velvet soaked in bourbon. Every surface is either wood, leather, or older than your grandfather's regrets. You step onto the rug in the main hall, woven in 1802 and rumoured to contain the ashes of 6 former members who died mid-debate. The smoking room is to the left, the reading room to the right. Straight ahead the bar, unmanned, yet always attended by some silent presence who knows your drink before you speak. You choose the reading room. It's the safest place to begin. You pass a bronze bust of Lord Wellington with a crack across his nose and a monocle wedged into his left eye. No one knows who put it there. No one dares remove it. You sink into a chair that has outlived 5 monarchs and 3 revolutions. It groans slightly, in protest or welcome. You can't tell. A steward appears. "Your usual, sir?" You nod. Moments later, a glass of sherry materializes on the armrest like an obedient ghost. Across the room, other men read silently. One rustles a newspaper, another sighs. Once, then blushes at the sound. Speaking here is permitted, but only if you're at least 60, titled or recently widowed. You qualify for none of these tonight, so you remain silent. But the silence is deceptive, Beneath it swirls politics, scandal, rivalry, and barely contained snobbery. You pretend to read the Times, though your eye drifts to a nearby table where two older men are engaged in a game of chess so slow it has entered its third week. No one dares interrupt. Chess at the club is sacred. Each move is whispered, each piece handled like porcelain. Spectators lean forward, nod once, then lean back, as if moved by the elegance of a pawn's journey toward destiny. You sip your sherry. It tastes of raisins, patience, and mild disappointment. This is what you've trained for. Years of polite nodding, of learning to signal entire paragraphs of emotion through eyebrow twitches, of mastering the art of being present while appearing entirely disengaged. And just when you start to wonder if this is all a colossal waste of upholstered time, someone clears his throat. Heads turn. A man near the fireplace is about to speak. You brace yourself. Something is about to happen. The man by the fireplace is Sir Percival Haddon, Baronet of East Bumbleshire, and owner of one of the finest moustaches ever to make peace with gravity. He stands carefully like a cathedral rising from the fog and clears his throat again. Everyone leans back, not from interest, but from anticipation of endurance. Sir Percival speaks only once a fortnight, and never in fewer than 70 words per sentence. "Gentlemen," he begins, "it has come to my attention that the wallpaper in the East Reading alcove has, over the course of the last 3 fiscal quarters, begun to display a degree of peeling which, though at first minor and possibly attributable to fluctuations in the barometric condition of the chamber, has now reached a stage I would describe as both perceptible and, dare I say, borderline unseemly." You suppress a smile. This is exactly what you came for. Sir Percival's speech unfurls like a parliamentary scroll, filled with qualifiers, references to upholstery, and 3 quotations from Latin poets. None relevant. He never mentions names, but everyone knows it's a jab at Lord Withersby, who donated the wallpaper in 1871 and insists it was French. It was not. The room does not erupt in applause. That would be vulgar. Instead, there is a solemn pause, followed by a synchronized sip of brandy. A gentleman's ovation. Sir Percival sits. Order restored. You rise, careful not to scuff the rug, and retreat to the smoking room. It's darker here. Low lamps, amber haze, the faint tang of burned cinnamon from someone's experimental cigar. This room is where reputations drift and settle like ash. You join a circle near the window. One man mentions the Queen's latest garden fete. Another mutters about railway shares. You contribute a shrug and a murmur, and it's enough. Because the secret currency here isn't conversation, it's containment. Whoever says the least wins. Someone brings up the new electric lights being tested in Piccadilly. "Ghastly," says Colonel Winthrop, polishing his monocle. "Soon we'll be roasting in our own lamps like Sunday hens." You nod sagely, though you secretly like the idea of not stumbling over spittoons in the dark. An argument brews, slow and polite as a tea kettle. Gaslight versus electricity. Steam versus sanity. Progress versus being left behind. You excuse yourself before it reaches the anecdote phase, when someone will recount a second-hand story involving Lord So-and-so and a fried lamp cord. Back in the hall, you pause beneath a portrait of the club's founder, Lord Catamole, who once declared that a gentleman's greatest achievement is going an entire evening without revealing a single opinion. You smile. You have done just that. It's nearly 11 now. Time to collect your coat, tip the steward precisely 1 shilling, and vanish into the misty street without leaving a footprint of scandal behind. Outside, London breathes heavier. The gas lamps flicker. The carriages rattle. Somewhere, a dog barks with the voice of someone who's never been invited to a single club. You walk home, hat low, shoulders squared, chest full of a quiet pride. Tonight, you are every inch the Victorian gentleman, measured, poised, entirely unreadable, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. Morning again, and you're not quite sure what day it is, until the butler brings in the visiting cards. That's the giveaway. Stacked like judgment, fanned like guilt, the visiting cards are lined up on a silver tray as if awaiting trial. Thin rectangles of social obligation. Each card carries a message deeper than any letter. I saw you were out. I made the effort. Now you owe me one. You sigh. It's Thursday, and that means calls. Social visits so brief they can be timed with an egg, and so fraught with etiquette that entire books have been written on the angle at which you place your hat. You don't particularly want to visit the Mortimers, or the Fairchilds again, or heaven forbid old Lady Voss, who insists on feeding you brandy-laced jelly and asking if you're still pure. But your card has already been left in their silver trays, and in Victorian England a card left is a debt incurred. You dress for daylight diplomacy, not as stiff as Sunday, not as rumpled as Tuesday's leisure coat. Your hat is brushed, your cane selected for its elegance, not its weight. Then comes the real dilemma. Which gloves? White is formal, grey is respectable. Tan is fashionable but scandal adjacent. You settle for grey with a white lining, just enough flair to show you care, but not so much that anyone might think you enjoy it. You step into your carriage, not to drive, of course. You haven't touched reins since the top hat incident of '78. You simply nod, and your coachman rattles off. First stop, Lady Wexley's. The butler lets you in with a grunt so polished it might have been a welcome. The drawing-room smells of lavender polish and antique pressure. You're seated before you can speak. Lady Wexley enters 5 minutes later. This is her power move. You pretend not to notice. Mr. Fairchild, she says. Your name, once again. Hopelessly mistaken. How charming of you to appear. You smile. You do not correct her. You merely comment on the violets in her window. She tells you they're wilting from Irish air. You suggest prayer. The clock ticks. After exactly 15 minutes, you stand. She pretends to protest. You pretend to resist. The butler sees you out with the same grunt. One down. You glance at your notebook. Yes, you keep one. Every gentleman does. A slim, leather-bound ledger that tracks your calls, time spent, compliments paid, and offences committed, both given and received. It reads like a spy's diary, only with more cake. Second stop, the Davenports. Their home is modern, gaslit and tiled, smelling faintly of progress and new money. Mr. Davenport is absent as usual. Mrs. Davenport receives you with thinly veiled panic, her toddler howling somewhere behind a closed door. You comment on the hallway umbrella stand. She beams like you complimented her womb. Tea is served. Biscuit crumbles are feared. You drink delicately, pinky just arched enough to say, "Yes, I'm judging," but gently. Before leaving, you inquire about her uncle's gout. She doesn't have an uncle. She thanks you anyway. You mark it as a successful call. This, after all, is the dance. Your next stop is the Thornbury residence, where no one answers the door, because no one is home. And that, in fact, is perfect. You hand your card to the maid, making sure it is placed face up on the silver tray near the entry. You do not write anything on it. That would be considered too forward unless you're leaving condolences or proposing marriage. The maid nods. You nod. The door closes. Congratulations. You fulfill the obligation without speaking to anyone. This, of course, is known among gentlemen as a most efficient call. You note it in your ledger with a small flourish. 3 more, and you'll be done for the week. As your carriage bounces toward the next visit, you glance out at the London streets, a parade of petticoats, chimney pots, and shouting newsboys. A woman in a plum bonnet crosses the road and gives you a sideways look, which you pretend not to notice. Eye contact in a moving carriage. Outrageous. You arrive next at the Lemworths' townhouse. A servant escorts you into a room full of doilies and the scent of weak rosewater. Miss Lemworth herself greets you, dressed in lace so stiff it might count as armour. She's seated at the piano playing a tune so hesitant it sounds like the keys are resisting her fingers. You compliment her skill. She blushes as expected. Her mother beams. Tea is brought in and arranged with the same reverence one might show a relic from St. Peter's bones. You sip. You smile. You ask after the cat, though you've never seen it. Conversation shifts to weather. Again, always the weather. That safe, endless, ever-wobbly topic that Victorian society leans on like a crutch made of fog. You mention the recent drizzle. Mrs. Lemworth agrees it was the sort that ruins both shoes and reputations. That's enough excitement for one call. You stand, thank them, bow, and back out with the grace of a ghost who regrets being polite. Now to the final visit. The hardest kind. A return call. You see, earlier in the week Sir Edwin Pallister left his card at your house. And not just a regular card. He left one with a turned-down corner, indicating he had come in person and expects you to do the same. This is no ordinary social nicety. This is a duel of manners. An unspoken chess match where every move is laden with implications, rank, influence, even romantic suggestion. If the card had a different edge turned, which it didn't, but might one day, you arrive. Sir Edwin meets you in his study, which smells of leather, pipe tobacco, and ancient disapproval. He gestures to a chair. You sit precisely 2 inches from the edge, attentive, but not desperate. You discuss the latest bill in Parliament. You both oppose it, of course. You for reasons of tradition, he for reasons of spite. You agree in tone, but not in content. He mentions his hunting dog. You pretend to know what kind it is, and just when you think the call might end in peace, he offers you a second glass of port. This is a trap. 1 glass is politeness. 2 is intimacy. If you accept, you're deepening the acquaintance. If you refuse, you might insult him. You take it. You sip slowly. He nods once, and in that nod is every layer of Victorian male bonding. Secrecy, suspicion, and satisfaction. The visit ends. You've survived. You return home, exhausted in your bones but pristine in reputation. You hand your notebook to the butler, who files it in the lockbox. Tomorrow you'll receive more cards, and you'll do it all again. Because in this world of pressed linen and unsaid things, a gentleman's silence says more than 1,000 letters ever could. It's Sunday morning, and for once you wake up without a plan. No calls to make, no moustache tips to trim, no gloves to categorize by emotional nuance. Just the quiet hum of a household moving softly below your floorboards. The housekeeper stoking the fire, the butler muttering Latin curses at the boots, the maid rattling the tea tray with the passive aggression of a Victorian sunrise. You lie in bed a little longer than is proper, staring at the canopy above like it holds the answers to the unspoken question in every gentleman's soul. What exactly am I supposed to do with myself now? Because here's the secret no one tells you. After all the etiquette, the honour, the rituals and routines, being a Victorian gentleman is quite frankly exhausting. And more than that, deeply, profoundly lonely. Not the sort of loneliness that comes from absence, but the kind that comes from always being watched, judged, decoded, measured by the cut of your trousers, the curve of your walking stick, the speed of your tea sipping, every action a message, every silence a decision. You finally rise, dress with minimal fanfare, still 3 layers of course, and descend to breakfast. Today it's kedgeree. Yesterday it was devilled kidneys. Tomorrow probably poached eggs arranged like disappointed bishops. But today, the warm comfort of fish and rice reminds you of the only true joy in a gentleman's life: routine. Because while the rules may be maddening, they're also anchors. They hold you upright in a world spinning toward madness: steam trains, electric lights, women wanting degrees. Every ritual you follow is a line drawn in the sand against chaos. And today, the ritual is reflection. You retire to the study with a slim volume of verse and the newspaper folded just so. Your chair creaks. A fire hisses gently. Outside, the rain has begun again. A soft, whispery drizzle that seems to apologize for intruding. You flip open your ledger, page after page of perfect handwriting. Names visited, cards left, compliments paid, outfits worn, arguments dodged, 1,000 tiny maneuvers of polite warfare. You linger on one entry. Thursday, March 14th. Complimented Miss Lemworth's piano. She blushed. You smile. Not because you fancy her, not because the music was good, but because for one brief second you were not playing a role. You were just you. Still wrapped in velvet formality, yes. Still behind 3 inches of waistcoat and social armour, but something human slipped through the cracks. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point of it all. Not perfection, not purity, not power. But surviving in a world that demands performance, without letting yourself become the costume. You close the ledger gently, as if it might shatter under too much truth. The fire crackles. Rain streaks the window like teardrops from a sky too proud to sob. Outside, the world rolls on. Clattering hansom cabs, shouting flower girls, chimneys that cough more than the gentlemen who pay to keep them hidden behind curtains. You rise. Today you will walk, not to be seen, not to be admired, just to remember that the world is wider than parlours and port, and that not everything polished is real. You pass the hat stand. Pick the one with the softest brim. No gloves. You step outside into the grey hush of a London afternoon. Umbrellas bloom like silent flowers around you. The air smells of wet slate and tobacco. You walk past the club, and for the first time in months you do not go in. No need to prove your civility with perfect posture and strategic silences. You pass a bakery, a real one. Not a supplier to anyone titled or powdered, just a shop, a counter, and the warm, glorious stink of yeast and sugar. You buy a bun. You eat it standing in the street like a dock worker. Sticky fingers, no napkin. Just you and the rain, and the rare taste of doing exactly what you please. It's small, but it's enough. Because here's what they never tell you in etiquette manuals or gentlemen's primers, or the smug diaries of viscounts who never lifted a chamber pot in their lives. Being a Victorian gentleman isn't about rules. It's about restraint. You learn to feel things without showing them, to want things without asking, to exist as a collection of folded edges, hoping someone someday reads between the lines. And when they don't, you keep going, because even the stiffest cravat can't choke a soul forever. By dusk you return home damp but oddly content. Your butler eyes the bun crumbs on your sleeve but says nothing. You nod. The lamps are lit. Your chair waits. The ledger stays closed. Tonight you will not count your virtue in visits or posture. Tonight you will sip your tea slowly, let your socks slouch an inch too far, and, for the first time all week, breathe like no one's watching. Because maybe the strangest rule of all for a Victorian gentleman is learning when to break one. And now, dear listener, you can let all of that go. Let the cravats loosen, the etiquette books close, and the candlelight fade into a soft glowing blur. No more calling cards, no more teaspoons arranged by moral alignment, just you and the quiet. Feel your breath settle, like a gentleman's sigh after a long day of politeness. You've walked the foggy lanes. You've sipped the brandy. You've outlasted 100 invisible rules. And now, there's nothing left to prove. You don't need to memorize glove codes or remember who blinked first at the club. None of that matters here. All that remains is stillness. Picture yourself back in that leather armchair, fire glowing low, the ticking clock matching the rhythm of your heart. You've done well. You've survived a world of endless expectations, with your sense of self intact beneath all the starch and silk. And now, nothing more is required of you. No bows, no conversation, no mask, only rest. So take one last deep breath. Let the fog roll over the cobblestones. Let the street lamps flicker and the tea grow cold. You've earned your peace, dear gentleman. Sleep well.